Comic Timing is member supported by listeners like you over at patreon.com/comic timing. For as little as $1 a month, you can continue to support the show, get occasional early releases, diary entries, random other things we throw in there. You name it, we got it. And we thank you so much for your continued support of the show in any way that you can give it. I'd also like to thank the last nameless David, Sean Lynn, and Timothy Riffenberg for being our latest patrons over at patreon.com/comic timing. Thank you very much for your continued support, however you give it. And now for something completely different, Mr. Murdough.
I'm Canadian, ex-Secret Service, mutant, X-Man. I'm a warrior. I'm the best there is at what I do. But what I do isn't very nice.
This is Comic Timing, episode 223. Spotlight on Wolverine, part 1.
Hey there, folks. My name's Ian Levinstein, and welcome to episode 223 of Comic Timing. I couldn't help but have the preamble be a typical Spotlight preamble because it just wouldn't be the same otherwise. Mr. Murdough, thank you very much for getting the party started there, and welcome back to the show.
Mm-hmm. Always a pleasure, bub.
Yes, absolutely.
There's the first bub.
There will be many, many more bubs where that came from. I can almost guarantee it. Shane with us once again as well. Shane, happy to have you.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Excellent. And of course, the master of ceremonies, the man that will ensure that I don't really have to talk that much this episode, Mr. Chris Eberle.
Levy Poo, I'm honored that you've opened up your house for us to do this spotlight.
Absolutely.
Which has been in the works for quite some time, so I'm glad it's found a home.
Come and knock on our door. We'll be waiting for you. happy to have it happen.
I love that show. Come on, knock on my door.
So yeah, for any of you unfamiliar with the Spotlight format, essentially it's a deep dive into usually a specific character. Sometimes it could be a team just for variety's sake, but for the most part, it's a specific character. And Chris Eberle has had this in the works for quite some time, and it only makes sense for it to be released now. Just have to get that in there for any of you video folks that I'm Wolverine clad tonight with my favorite X-Men shirt. But the movie, of course, Deadpool and Wolverine gets released in theaters as we are recording this tomorrow. And I will be there at the theater at the Alamo Draft House with Chris with a K, checking that out tomorrow. Looking forward to that at about 9:30 p.m. And we will have a review here on Comic Timing with I don't want to quite say who's the gold team and who's the blue team, but whoever the other team of Comic Timing is with Brent, Donovan, Jamal, Chris, myself, whoever can get a chance to see the movie Raph as well. We're going to have those folks on and catch up on that, as well as the fact that Mr. Donovan Morgan Grant, as we record this right now, is at San Diego Comic-Con. And that is happening this very moment. Yep. In San Diego, and I look forward to hearing his on the floor reporting. I believe he had a meeting with Mark Waid actually as part of his side gig at DC Comics blog. So definitely looking forward to hearing more about that. But that's all for whatever episode comes next. We are here now, and Chris Eberle, I'm very happy to say the floor is yours, my friend. Take it away.
Honored, brother. Right now, let me start with not really a disclaimer, but just a dose of reality. Researching Wolverine for Spotlight was, shall we say, an interesting and complicated and challenging experience.
Yes.
So here's how I'm doing this. So this is part 1. Mm-hmm. I don't know when we'll do part 2 someday, but when time allows. But we're going through the publishing year of 1983.
Okay.
With this first Spotlight. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, because Wolverine is one of the most retro continuity characters in the history of superhero comics.
What do you mean?
I'll be bringing up elements of his history that were published well past 1983.
I'm sure.
But because I like to talk about the origin and sort of stick to a chronology, at least a semblance of chronology, I'll be bringing a lot of that material as well. So, in terms of publications, we'll be stopping around the time of the classic From the Ashes arc from the flagship Uncanny X-Men title in 1983.
Okay.
But I'll be bringing up stuff that was published in the 1990s and in the 21st century. And boy, I'm sure you guys can all relate to this. As I was doing the research, because I haven't read a lot of Wolverine in the past really couple years, and I was learning about, oh my God, just characters that I never knew about, and twists and turns and his history. And this is it was really fun to do this, but it was definitely like trying to find your way through like that labyrinth in The Shining. Luckily, I wasn't being chased by a guy with an axe, but it wasn't stressful. But wow, this was a daunting one. Especially, I'm sure many listeners are aware, in the story of Wolverine, as they develop the character from the 70s forward, they start to peel back layers, and you start to realize, okay, this is true. We think that's true. They realize it's not true. Wolverine thinks that's true. We, the readers, know that isn't true. And there's all this to unfold. So, disclaimer: I did the best I could.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was a fun challenge. I hope this overview does the character justice. Now, as always, in the tradition of our spotlights, we always start with our respective first impressions of this character. Shane, why don't you start, buddy?
I've always found him to be entertaining, a lot of fun, a little bit grisly, but that's the fun aspect. He's a little bit at times ambiguous, because he can be so rough and so feral, but he's a lot of fun. Metal claws coming out of your hand. How can you go wrong? Whenever I read him, I tend to hear the X-Men from the 90s cartoon voice in my head anymore. I can't really remember what I ever would have heard before that.
Australian, clearly, Shane. That's
that's probably true. From the
that was
Spider-Man and His Amazing Friend. You're probably right. That's exactly probably what it was. But once that 90s cartoon got in there, that's the voice I hear in my head whenever I read Wolverine.
Yeah,
Murd?
It is an authentic Canadian voice, after all.
Indeed.
All right, gents. Well, I've got 6 words for you. Care for a piece of fruit?
Yes.
Counting on that.
Amazing.
Right back to the aforementioned by Shane and Ian Australian accented Wolverine in his first ever outside media appearance in that episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which I'm sure Chris has in his notes to bring up later.
I do indeed.
But, yeah, that episode featuring Wolverine and some other X-Men with Iceman and Firestar and Spider-Man going up against the Juggernaut. And I remember, I know I saw that episode as a kid and thinking that a guy with knives coming out of his knuckles, this is a superhero? He looks more like a villain or a monster or something. And then later on when the Juggernaut grabbed him and just like flung him like a dart and embedded him in the wall by his claws, that didn't make him any less menacing, really. It's just like it made him harder to take seriously for several years after that. But yeah, Wolverine and the X-Men in general. I think I've said this before, but as a child, the X-Men had kind of the same appeal / revulsion that I got when I saw the traveling freak shows at the York State Fair when I was a kid. They still had those in the 80s, apparently, the Carney-style freak shows. And of course, as we'll see here, the X-Men actually literally were in freak shows at different points in their career. Not against their will, of course, but yeah, they always were just kind of off-putting and weird, and Wolverine in particular with his steak knives coming out of his hands just convinced me as a child and throughout up until I was a young adolescent that certain superheroes, in particular certain Marvel superheroes, were just not for me. So it was a long time before I was able to warm up to the old Canucklehead, and until I was a teenager when hairy, violent loners with animalistic urges begin to make a little more sense.
Sure.
And so in time, I learned to appreciate a good Wolverine yarn every once in a while. So I like him more than other characters with a killer's instinct, like say Frank Castle, for example, who is still pretty far to the bottom of my list of favorite Marvel Comics characters. But Wolverine, Yeah, Logan and I would share a cider with Wolverine. He could have one of his beers, and I'd have a cider.
Yeah.
Wolverine is cool by me here in the here and now. Although I do think, even to this day, and we can get into this later on too, that he is one character that has suffered more from the so-called rule of cool than just about any other character this side of Batman. Because the guy's basically completely invincible, and arguments can be made, but between the healing factor and the unbreakable bones, he should be invulnerable into absurd extremes sometimes. So there's my initial say on Wolverine.
Quick side note, I always love when we explore Murd's childhood, and each time we do, some new sort of body horror manifestation appears. A freak show in York, Pennsylvania in the 1980s. Like, incredible Murd.
It happened. I was there more than 1 year, too. I never actually went into any of them, but they were definitely there. I mean,
the traumas. It's amazing you've come out as whole as you have, my friend.
Gotta love it.
Yep, we're just peeling back layers of my past trauma, just as we are with Logan here.
All right, Levy Pooh, fire away.
All right. So the character of Wolverine for me, he's everywhere. He is quite literally everywhere, because the way that in earlier days of Marvel lore, you'd have Spider-Man show up as a guest star in order to make the sales of a book jump. And to this point, it is still the case. For a solid, I'd say, through the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, that was Wolverine. Wolverine would somehow show up in your book. It didn't matter what type of book it was. It doesn't matter whether or not it made sense. Wolverine was there. And eventually, past this part one that we're talking about, there was even a book called Wolverine and the X-Men, because for quite some time, when you thought X-Men, you thought Wolverine. Whether or not he was your favorite character or not, Wolverine was usually front and center. He usually wasn't the leader of the X-Men. That would fall on Cyclops, Storm, sometimes even Nightcrawler, like depending on the day of the week. But Wolverine was that cool brute character, the guy who didn't give a damn, the guy who would do what he had to do in order to ensure that the team continued to be the team. That bad things didn't happen. He would go in there and use force when necessary. But he also had that suave coolness factor to him that continues to this very day. I prefer Earth Tone Wolverine over Yellow and Black Wolverine personally.
I do too.
I think it actually works better for even the camouflage nature of the character, because a lot of the times he is trying to sneak up on people. It's very hard to sneak up on people when you're wearing yellow. It's just not in the nature of there. When you're blending into the earth and you have earth tones, it's a lot easier to do. But both costumes have their time in the sun. I associate Wolverine with the X-Men more with the yellow. I associate Wolverine more on his own with the earth tones. And I think as a character, he sure as hell has changed, evolved, and grown over the years. And it's usually in his quiet moments that Wolverine is at his strongest. Whether it be as a mentor to somebody like Kitty, whether it be as a mentor to Jubilee, whether it be in romantic moments with Mariko, whether it be moments of clarity when he's telling Cyclops, Scott, you're being an idiot. Take a minute, relax, think about it. Maybe we should do this instead. He actually has that in him, and he has that capability. He's one of the few people in the world, and actually Cyclops is also probably one of the few people in the world that can do the opposite. But Wolverine could tell Cyclops, knock it off. Cyclops could tell Wolverine, knock it off. Then he'll get to the chest, but he could still do it and get away with it. But definitely a much more complicated character than I guarantee you anybody ever thought he would be when he was introduced in Incredible Hulk back in the day. Really a tentpole of the Marvel Universe in so many different ways.
Magnificent, sir. All right, so for me, I go back to 1981.
Mm-hmm.
So this is prior to me discovering comic shops. And I'm sure Shane can relate to this. In the 80s, my parents would grab random comic books off spinner racks in convenience stores and pharmacies and whatnot. And at one point, we were in a convenience store, and I just grabbed a random copy of X-Men, X-Men 152, 1981. And at this point, I knew who the X-Men were. I had Son of Origin, so I had read the Silver Age Origin. I had not read Dark Phoenix Saga yet, for example. So I didn't know anything about the so-called new X-Men. So I get this comic, and on the cover, these characters I don't recognize. And this one character in this really cool-looking, as Ian, I wouldn't use the term, as Ian said, this earth tone. I knew he'd get the cover. I'm already getting emotional. So earth tone costume. I'm like, wow, that guy looks really cool. And so 1981, so I was 8. So I start reading the book, and if you're an 8-year-old and there's a guy running around with claws coming out of his hands, someone like myself who was already into war stories and all that, I was automatically enthralled. And over the next couple year or so, I would get other random issues with Wolverine in them. Then I got the Dark Phoenix Saga trade paperback, one of Marvel's early trade paperbacks reprinting a classic story. And of course, there he had his yellow costume on. Automatically, I favored the Earth Tone one too, Ian. But I fell in love with the character as a kid very quickly. And then now let me go forward a little bit to middle school. So it's the mid 1980s, and my parents buy me this, which was a trade paperback reprinting the Claremont Miller. Is it Rubenstein or Rubenstein, the inker? Does anybody know? Joseph Rubenstein.
I think it's Rubenstein. I'm pretty sure it's Rubenstein.
So
Yeah.
Rubenstein, reprint of the 1982 Wolverine series. Now it's like 1986, 1987. So I'm 12 or 13. So a book with ninjas. It's the 1980s. Ninjas are very much in the pop culture zeitgeist.
Yes, they are.
And Wolverine. So I was just salivating over getting this book, and those various experiences really initiated my love for this character. And then to piggyback on what Ian was saying, as I started to read more and more, as I get older, I really started to appreciate how complex Wolverine or Logan as a character is. And I started to become really enthralled by the different layers being peeled back or not being peeled back in some cases about his origin, his powers, the fact that it became more and more clear that he was very old, that he'd experienced different eras of history. And just, the fact that he was a rare, well done, sir. He was a rare, so-called superhero who would kill people. And, that was not something you normally saw. I mean, Murd mentioned the Punisher. And I think one of the things we'll talk about in this episode as well is that as we get into the grim and gritty era of the 1980s comics, Dark Knight, Watchmen, and so forth, two of the characters that they really milked when it came to that trend was Wolverine and the Punisher, because both characters would use violence to achieve their ends. Now, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about this in this episode, as Wolverine has developed more and more, especially in the hands of Chris Claremont, you realize he's not just some berserker killer, that he's far more than that. And in the hands of a skilled writer who appreciates, nuance, you really come to appreciate how many sort of folds or facets there are to Logan as a character. Logan essentially as the samurai, Logan as like the frontiersman, Logan as the soldier who fought in various wars. There's just he's one of the most, when he's done right, he's one of the most fascinating characters in comics. And the era we're looking at here is for me my favorite of this character. I mean, down the road when I have the time, we'll do subsequent parts. But one of the things, Ian made, I want to touch on now is that as Wolverine became more and more popular, for all the reasons we've been delineating here, in some ways, I think they lost the character. In some ways, depending on who was writing it, what book he was appearing in, because he just became so popular. I equate in some ways, although not to the same impact, to like Venom. Just the constant usage of the character, the point where he's so oversaturated that you start to lose some of what makes the character so great. Now, that's not always the case. And again, Wolverine has been around now since 1974. So we're now this is his 50th anniversary. So inevitably there's going to be vicissitudes when it comes to how the character is portrayed. But I think at the essence of the character, what we're going to talk about here, this is one of the most richly nuanced characters in the Marvel universe, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
And from my perspective, it took years to learn stuff. It was a fun adventure when someone would write him and just give a little tidbit here, a tidbit there, whether it was true or not. For him, it was new information or something that he was seeking to find out. It was just a grand adventure that I wasn't sure how to take at first until learning more about Wolverine as my reading career went along.
Well, that's a great point, Shane, because in the early years of the character's history, one of the great aspects of his appeal was, who was Wolverine?
Yes.
You know, where did he come from? You know, what made him who he is? How did he get the adamantium? I mean, for a time, you weren't even sure what were the claws part of him? Were they not part of him? What was his name? Because it's not revealed right away either. So everybody loves a good mystery, and they really develop that. I mean, as we're going to discuss here, it gets really complicated after a while. I mean, especially as you get into retro continuity. Like, for example, when I was doing my research for this episode, look at my notes here. Just recently, they introduced a MacGuffin character to try to kind of explain a lot of what happened in Wolverine's life. I'm trying to find the character's name. I was immediately turned off by this. I hate when they do this. Forgive me, guys. I'm trying to find the guy's name. Romulus.
Okay.
I don't know who the hell Romulus is, but apparently he's all over Wolverine's history now.
I know who Romulans are.
I mean, Romulus, of course, goes back to the myths of ancient Rome and the origins of ancient Rome. Sure. But regardless, we'll be mentioning this character periodically because he's been retconned into being a key sort of mover and shaker in Wolverine's history. Ian, you familiar with this character?
A little bit, mostly for the retro continuity of it all, because I know that if I'm remembering correctly, I think this may be the character that is from Origin. That I can Sabretooth, because they were implying at one point that Sabretooth might be Wolverine's brother, and I believe this
we'll talk about that.
This kind of also fills that gap a little bit, because clearly he wasn't, but I don't know. This is a character that as you said, I've seen pop up every now and then, but not enough for me to be fully familiar with the character. So I may even be getting the origin part of it wrong. All I know is that he has 4 claws instead of 3. So yeah, good times.
Yeah, he doesn't appear in the original origin story.
No, I think 2 he may have showed up in, but don't quote.
Well, we'll talk about it. But I mean, he's not going to be the focus because, personal prejudice. I find stuff like that just stupid. Number one, and number two, I just think the stories we're looking at are so well done. I just as a completist, I wanted to bring in all this retro continuity because that's what's in the history now. So that's what we're going to do. All right, now, as always, I want to start with some quotes from the icons who participated in the creation of the character. Now, Wolverine first appeared in 1974, so we're acknowledging his 50th anniversary. And as some of you guys already noted, the character, when he first appears, is really one-dimensional. He's got a snazzy John Romita Sr. classic Bronze Age design costume. And as Ian pointed out, I mean, I'm sure we'll have a soft spot for the old costume, but I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But it's a superhero costume. So, and it looks like he's going to be doing a version of it in the film that's coming out.
I am excited about that.
Well, of course, because just to see that in the movie is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, just to see an actual real costume in a movie is exciting.
And now Ian's put on the screen for those who following along at home on video. This is Romita Sr.'s classic sketch of the character design. Notice the original headpiece was not as sort of dramatically flared out as the one that we're all familiar with today. So again, a lot of classic characters. He says a lot of the great superheroes. Their initial costume design tends to morph and change over time. So
I'll tell you what, the rest of that costume, other than the headpiece, is pretty spot on for many years.
Oh,
pretty much.
Yeah,
pretty much.
The whiskers
now,
are thing that he's lost over the years, definitely.
One of the things noted in the sketch that I'm glad Ian put it up was that we often forget that Wolverine is short.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hugh Jackman doesn't help that.
No, well, Hugh Jackman is 6'3".
Yeah.
So in keeping with, like, if you look at, like, especially like, if an artist is really in tune to the history of the character, Wolverine is always shorter than all the other X-Men.
Yep.
He's basically Kitty Pryde's height,
Yep.
essentially. But as time passes, especially with the multimedia aspect, they always make him appear taller. But he's a very deadly runt, essentially. Now, let me go to some quotes here, because when it comes to who created the character, it's really sort of a galaxy of names that we're all familiar with. So Roy Thomas is editor-in-chief in 1974, going into that year in the Marvel bullpen. And Len Wein is writing The Incredible Hulk, doing a great run on The Incredible Hulk. And with Herb Trimpe still penciling the book. Herb Trimpe, one of his most famous runs in comics was penciling The Incredible Hulk in the Bronze Age. And Thomas is giving an interview here to CBR in 2018. Only 3 requirements of the Wolverine, all of which I gave to Len in my office. 1, he was Canadian and announced as such right away. 2, he was short because a Wolverine is a small animal. 3, he had a quick temper because Wolverines are known for being fierce and taking on beasts far bigger than they are. I consider that I, Len Wein, John Romita, and Herb Trimpe are all the co-creators of the Wolverine in that chronological order. Again, often demonstrating that creating a character is often a team effort.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stan. It's often not just, one person. There's often a variety of people involved. And, Wolverine is a composite, essentially, of the contributions of all these. And again, any longtime comic fan, your heart's racing here, these legendary names. So,
Chris, at any point in the early research, did you find anything about his name initially possibly being Talon? Because I know they've since tried to utilize that code name for Laura Kinney, aka X-23, I believe, because that was one of the original bandied about code names for Wolverine before they settled on Wolverine.
Honey, I didn't find that. I did find that they were considering calling him Badger.
That doesn't sound right.
Initially, I think, although Badger later became an independent character in the 1980s.
Right,
but no, I didn't hear Talon though. So thank you for contributing that.
Yep, no worries.
So
I
here's
just
Len.
can't see Badger coming across the screen.
But Honey Badger essentially became a character because that's Laura Kinney's little sister, which was later introduced. So the younger clone of Wolverine is Honey Badger. So yes, Marvel baby, Marvel.
Here's the late great Len Wein giving his views in the PBS documentary "Superheroes: Never-Ending Battle" from 2013.
Oh, it's such a great documentary.
Indeed. I think from my perspective, what makes Wolverine so attractive is the unpredictability. The belief that he doesn't give a damn about anybody but himself and spends his whole life proving that's not true. That's a great point Wein is making there, because the surface character of Wolverine is very one-dimensional. Berserker fury, crazed, unpredictable, how can you control him? But in the hands of skilled writers, they peel back those layers. There's so much more to the character that's going on. And I think they start to establish that really relatively quickly in the X-Men, because they establish that Wolverine is in love with Jean Grey. Mm-hmm. And that's established relatively early in the Bronze Age run. So kudos to Claremont and Cockrum Byrne, the artists working with Claremont. They really started to establish pretty quickly this guy is more than just someone who's just there to hack and slash things and drink beer and say bub. So, which are all fun parts of his persona, don't get me wrong, but I think what gives the character the staying power over, again, 50 years is that they've just done so much more with him. So again, like if I go back to when I was a 12-year-old kid, oh, cool, he's fighting ninjas, he's got claws. And then as I get older, he's also trying to, find his soul, and he's like a samurai. There's so much more to him. So
little side note, if
please,
anybody is listening and wants to watch that documentary, I know I found it on iTunes on sale once for like a couple bucks each episode. So I have them on my account and I routinely listen to them over and over now and then. It's a fantastic documentary.
Shane, the master of multimedia. Once again, that's PBS documentary Superheroes: A Never-Ending Battle from 2013. All right, here's a quote from, he didn't create Wolverine, but I think just like with Magneto, he basically really realized the character. Chris Claremont. This is from the introduction to the trade it is held up, reprint in the 1982 Wolverine miniseries. The essence of Wolvie's character was a failed samurai. To samurai, duty is all, selfless service to the path to their ultimate ambition, death with grace. Every fact, every moment of their lives is absolutely under control. Wolverine, however, is almost a primal life force, totally beyond control, as graceless as can be. The one might be considered the ultimate expression of humanity, wherein the will, the intellect, totally overmaster all other aspects of existence, while the other is the total animal. And that's a wonderful quote. Why I chose it, because at the core of the character is that struggle between the rage, the penchant for just incredible violence, and then the man, the humanity, the grace, the man who's who's actually well read, who's experienced so many different facets of life, who can appreciate a Zen garden, poetry, so forth, and that's at the core of the conflict within the character. So,
in Wolverine's own words, no matter how hard I strive for inner serenity, I screw up. From Wolverine number 3.
I just got a chill. I love Bird. All right, now let's dispense with some of the basics. So, as we discussed, Wolverine first appeared as a cameo, just a panel, which Ian, of course, is already bringing up, no doubt. Incredible Hulk 180, the last page, the last panel. Look at the size of that belt buckle, ladies and gentlemen.
Also notice that the I don't know where the detractors or retractors on the ends of his claws aren't actually on the gloves in this.
Good point, Ian.
Yeah, they come out of his wrist. Yeah,
that's included with Wolverine, but it's not there quite yet.
So, just initially, what do we all think of this initial costume design?
I'm glad that they changed it a little bit. I think,
I am too.
I'm glad the whiskers were the first thing to go.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah. The original cowl just doesn't work nearly as well as the big-eared one that we would later get.
Yeah.
Yep.
But otherwise, as you noted, it's more or less the same design. Again, the strength. Romita was the great costume designer in the 70s, right through the present day, for all intents and purposes.
Absolutely.
But I agree. I like they flared the headpiece out more. I know a lot of people love the yellow and blue suit, and I certainly appreciate, its history and it's. I think what he's worn the most when I think about his entire history as a character.
I think so too.
But for me, I always go back to, and this is probably the next part, but later in the 80s, they did a one-shot written by Christopher Priest, then under his original name, James Owsley, called Spider-Man versus Wolverine. And it's a great story. We'll talk about it in a future spotlight. But in that story, the two of them end up involved in intrigue in East Germany, in East Berlin. So this is before the wall has fallen, the Cold War is still going on. And there's a panel, I remember vividly, where Spider-Man and Wolverine are on a roof, and Wolverine has put on his brown, or as Ian would say, his earth tone costume. And Spider-Man's thinking, I'm paraphrasing, God, when he puts that costume on, it just does something. Like it kind of creeped him out, actually. And that's the way it should be, because Wolverine is deeply intimidating. And I think that costume only adds to that. But that's just my own personal preference there. So his first full appearance is, of course, in Incredible Hulk 181. Now, I'm sure many of our listeners have read that story. So the Hulk is fighting the Wendigo. Murray, you want to explain the spiritual background of the Wendigo?
All right. The Wendigo is not so much a creature as it is a curse. It's passed on from victim to victim, and it has to do with cannibalism, the consumption of human flesh, that draws the curse of this lycanthropic curse. Or therianthropic is probably a better word for it, since the Wendigo is not really wolf-like. But it transforms anyone who's unfortunate enough to consume human flesh out there in the Canadian wilds into the latest bearer of the curse of the Wendigo, and he or she is transformed into this huge, hulking, hirsute, white-furred creature that can do nothing but shout its own name and cause carnage. And I think it's a French-Canadian fur trapper is the one who's suffering under that curse here. And I think it's his sister and
I believe so, yep.
friend of his that are working to try to free him from that curse and transfer the curse to the Hulk. And the friend is having second thoughts about that because he doesn't want somebody else to suffer the way the current victim is suffering. And in the end, it is the friend who ends up taking the Wendigo curse onto himself instead. But in the meantime,
he's in love with the sister, so he sacrifices himself, basically.
Yep.
you have to give her brother back.
Yep. Sorry, Murray, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Nope, I was pretty much done. But while I've got the floor, I would also like to mention that in that little cameo in Hulk number 180, before Wolverine even appeared on panel, the words "Weapon X" were uttered.
Yeah, that's true.
Good point, Murray.
And at the very beginning.
Well done. So we should note that Wolverine is in the employ of the Canadian government at this time, and he's sent in to pursue the two behemoths who are locked in battle. So Wolverine, I mean, this is an ongoing Hulk story. This is the Len Wein, Herb Trimpe run on Hulk, which is fantastic. Anybody who loves the Incredible Hulk, I'm sure you've read, or if you haven't, you definitely read a lot of his Bronze Age stuff. First, the Roy Thomas Herb Trimpe, then the Len Wein Herb Trimpe. Herb Trimpe had penciled the Hulk for quite a long time. Jack Abel on the inking, Christy Shield coloring, the legendary Artie Simic on lettering. So I think it's fair to say that Wolverine's kind of a one and done character here. He appears very briefly in 182, like a panel or two, is sort of like as a follow-up to what had happened in 181, and that's it. Then you don't see him again. But I forgot. Did they establish the mutant in that issue? I want to say they didn't, right?
I
don't recall off the top of my head. I must admit.
I just read it and I don't recall.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't believe they do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what's more established is his, relationship with the Canadian government than him necessarily being a mutant. But obviously, clearly he was one way or the other.
Well, he was able to go toe to toe against, one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel universe and lives. So, but Ian made a good point because you see him in the 182, if I'm correct, the quick little epilogue panels. He's arguing with his superiors. So, as Roy Thomas wrote, he wanted a quick-tempered character in keeping with, his moniker. So that's what we got. Now,
fun fact.
Ahead, yes.
Fun fact. This was the first time I've read those two issues.
Really?
Yep.
So what'd you think?
Certainly a sign of their times. Not that they were bad, but a little bit boring in parts just because of how they're written. But that's what they were back then. I enjoyed reading it because to be able to say I've read it and put that in my vernacular, I enjoyed it for that. But it's okay. Nothing special.
From what I remember about the issue, I mean, talking about the fact that Wolverine definitely becomes more of a character once he's with the X-Men than what he is here. It's clearly a Hulk story. Wolverine just happens to be the foil as part of this that's brought in, and it's also not even a Wolverine story; it's a Wendigo story. So he doesn't necessarily get the screen presence, nor the personality, nor the gravitas that he gets in later appearances, but it's a good way to establish a character, and technically you can say he was in 3 issues of a series. So what better way to establish a character, even if it is only a couple of panels in 181 and 180 and 182, to say that this character is clearly going to come back around, because you don't spend that much time on a character if they're just going to be one and done and you never heard from again.
It's interesting. Notice, because Ian has up on the screen now the first page of 182, and this is not how the logo we know talks when he says, "You came to this thing that my failure was only a temporary setback." That's not Wolverine.
Yeah.
Just add Bub to the end of that, and that fixes it all. Clearly.
Now,
I can still defeat that big brute. I can, Bub.
Now, so again, let's retcon alert, and there's going to be just a heap of those in this episode. So, Wolverine's birth name is James Howlett.
Yep.
Okay. The name he goes by when he reveals an 80 sides Wolverine that we all know for really his whole history is Logan. And he also uses a variety of aliases. The most famous, of course, is also Patch. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. Now, these are all names that were introduced, down the road as we move along. Now, as you mentioned, his creators are Roy Thomas, Len Wein, John Romita Sr. did the costume design, and Herb Trimpe penciled that issue. Now, I note here, for me, the full realization of the character, though, is Chris Claremont.
Yes.
In my opinion, when he got his hands on the character, just similar to when he got his hands on Magneto, he really starts to flesh out, because, again, he wrote the X-Men for 15 years, the character we all know and love today. So as so many of the X-Men characters and their villains, when it comes to the characters we know and love, a lot of it is really Chris Claremont. So we should also point out that, I remember reading this in some of the history, that Thomas was being encouraged to try to come up with characters that would further break into the Canadian readers market. So we talk about like Giant Size X-Men #1, which came out in 1975. So a year later, they purposely created characters from different parts of the world. Nightcrawler's German. Storm is, I believe, Kenyan, if I remember correctly. I don't know how to make comics in the Soviet Union, but anyway, Colossus was Russian. Sunfire, Japanese, so forth and so on. So Wolverine was part of that effort to, sort of create a multinational galaxy of characters here. Now, I look at my notes. So apparently, based on the history I read, they did briefly consider the name Badger for the character. Shane, there you go. So
it's just weird.
I'm reading here: a badger connotes annoyance, while a wolverine attacks larger animals despite its small size. It is solitary with a reputation for ferocity, which very much is in keeping with the character. So
I'd be annoyed if they called him Badger.
Oh yeah.
I mean, again, not to cast aspersions on Mike Iron's creation,
No.
the character Badger,
Yeah.
but I'm also glad they selected Wolverine.
Yeah, very
as
much
well.
so.
100%.
Now, one of the key contributions Len Wein made to the character, he wanted the claws made from adamantium. Now, adamantium first appeared all the way back in 1969 in the Silver Age in Avengers #66, written by Roy Thomas. So again, Roy Thomas's fingerprints are all over the early stages of a lot of these characters, a lot of these concepts. But again, early on, the idea was that his claws would be adamantium. So, they don't go into the skeleton yet in those early stories or anything like that. That's going to come later. But the claws. Now, obviously, I would imagine if you're a reader in 1974, you assume those claws are in his gloves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably what people thought. And then a little bit later on, they're going to reveal that's actually not the case. Okay, now let's do a good overview of his powers and his abilities. So, and it says here, in the comics, Wolverine's height is 5'3". Oh, I think Romita Sr. wrote 5'5".
And
On
they
his
actually
sketch.
downgraded that to 5'3".
So if you go on Marvel Wiki, they say it's 5'3". I'll give you a sense of scale to people at home. So like Tom Cruise, great action star, he's 5'7". So 5'3" or 5'5", depending on, give or take. Now, Hugh Jackman, as Shane noted, is 6'3". So now, does the height matter to you guys, or do you think it doesn't matter at this point? What do you
It
guys
doesn't
think?
anymore. It used to, 30 years ago, when, well, back then, of course, also in my head, it was Australian accent.
Sure.
I
So
almost spat out my Fanta. Go ahead.
things progress. So I am used to it. A big part of that is because of the X-Men movies and Hugh Jackman. I don't know that every artist in the last 20 years even keeps up with, he's only 5'3". I think everybody really draws him bigger than what he's intended to be anymore.
Whenever Disney gets around to casting the next, whenever the X-Men are fully folded into the MCU, I'm fully expecting that they will cast somebody who's closer to 5'3" in height.
Yes.
I would agree.
Why do you think that, Murd?
To better represent the vertically challenged community. Let's put it that
Gotcha.
way.
Yeah. And for that matter, at least like from my perspective, Marvel is no longer afraid to have their comic book characters be the comic book characters for the most part. When it comes to the movies, when it initially started, and in fact, an article just came out that basically confirmed everything that we always thought about those initial X-Men movies, that the entire reason why they have black spandex, black
Leather. Yeah.
leather Thank you. Is because of the Matrix movies. There's no other reason outside of the fact that the Matrix just came out. They were like, well, clearly they have to have black leather.
They were going to put Superman in black leather around the same time for crying out loud.
Yes, they were. Yeah, but this day and age, that's no longer a problem. People can wear their superhero costumes, and people can look like they do in the comics. So I could very, very easily see, maybe not 5'3", maybe they'll get somebody Tom Cruise, for example. It'd still be shorter than Ryan Reynolds and everybody else because everybody's 5'10" or 5'11", and it'll be close to what it is in the comics.
And in movie world, the perspective also lends itself to make someone look smaller, taller than what they are anyway, too, depending on how they shoot it and what they really costume them in and things that are around them. So you could possibly have a 5'5", 5'7" actor, but they're going to look a little bit shorter than that.
Yeah,
you're just killing it in the producer's chair this episode, man.
I just found the classic Marvel size chart for comparison, and just to see how much shorter Wolverine is than his fellow X-Men and fellow Marvel characters in general, just for comparison's sake. So yeah, get somebody who's 5'5", at least 5'4" at the tallest, and that'll make me happy. Come the MCU.
Now I'll look for that. That's a great picture.
As the illustrations note, Wolverine is short, but he's incredibly powerful in terms of his musculature, his stockiness. Even though he's short, he's an incredibly intimidating physical presence. I mean, just how broad-shouldered he is. I mean, again, this is a stone killer in many ways. So the physicality reflects that. Now, what's often forgotten, and this isn't always captured in the comics as well, depending on who's drawing it, he has canine-like teeth.
Yeah, I don't know that's I ever really noticed that in my reading.
Sometimes you see it on occasion. It's some of the older books I think about over the years. But if you go to the wiki file on the character, the dossier, so to speak, they emphasize he has animal-like teeth, for example. Of course, the most famous aspect is the 3-foot-long retractable bone claws.
Yes.
Right.
But that's retconned, right? Yes. That wasn't always the case.
So that they have established that was part of his mutation, that he has these bone claws. And then, of course, they are stored in his forearms. And, of course, when he's part of the Weapon X program, as many listeners no doubt know, they're then covered in the adamantium. Now, this, of course, then ties into his accelerated healing power, which is the other, or healing factor, which is the other part of his mutation, because every time Wolverine pops his claws, that causes injuries to his hands. And you have to assume it's painful, but the healing factor automatically heals those openings. So it's important to note the healing factor does not actually shield Wolverine from pain. That he feels when he's shot, stabbed, blown up, run over, take your pick. I mean, he feels it all. I mean, in the classic Logan miniseries, I think it's by Brian K. Vaughan, he survives a nuclear explosion. So,
that's what I mentioned earlier, the abuses of the rule of cool, where the characters' powers and...
a drop of blood. That actually happened once. He regenerated from a drop of blood. During Mark Guggenheim's run on the character, it was explained that it was some sort of weird, deal with the devil thing or coming back from hell or something. I don't know, but either way, I'm glad it's never happened again, because that is an abuse of a healing factor. You cannot.
That was more recently, wasn't it?
That was more recent, but more recent equals like 2004 or something like that.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was definitely not too long ago.
I will say I always appreciated in the first X-Men movie where I think it's Rogue asking him about the claws popping out and says something about, well, doesn't it hurt? And he's like, every time. And
every time.
You can hear the pain in his voice, the way Hugh Jackman delivered the line. So I appreciated that aspect of the character being put into the movie even at that time. In what was that, 99?
Yep. 2000.
2000?
Right? Yeah.
2000.
I can't remember if it was 99 or 2000.
Oh, look at this schematic you got up here. Oh, Levy poo.
Yep, that's it.
If I was there, I'd give you a big wet kiss right on the cheek. All right. So the healing factor, All right, so if Logan is drugged, toxins, like we've seen stories where everybody's poisoned, but he recovers faster than everybody else, for example. Any kind of physical injury, diseases. And of course, the healing factor is what allows him to survive, having all this adamantium put on his entire skeleton, which would kill a normal person.
Yeah.
So basically, this character is essentially in constant pain. I think it's fair to say that, his very existence, I mean, the healing factor, is trying to always keep up with all that he's dealing with. And the fact that he has this incredibly powerful metal bonded to his entire skeleton, only way he can survive that is because he has the healing factor. So now the healing factor also is what we assume is why he has this incredibly long lifespan. So one of the fun things for me as a reader about Wolverine's origin is how long has he been alive and how many eras of history has he experienced? The only part of that dreadful Wolverine Origins movie I liked, Shane knows where I'm going, was the opening sequence. They showed him going through different elements of history.
That was fantastic.
Like the Civil War, the world, like that was great. Then went all downhill from there, ladies and gentlemen.
Yep, it sure did.
Poor Ryan Reynolds. But
he did right by that movie. in Deadpool.
He found redemption.
Yeah, sure did. But that again, we know now from Origin, I'm holding up the trade of that miniseries, that Wolverine's been alive since the late 19th century. So he's experienced a tremendous amount of history, been directly involved in a lot of key events, some of which we'll talk about as we move through this episode. But the healing factor is the key. I mean, his speed, his strength, his stamina, agility, everything's enhanced by this healing factor. The fact that he can confront the Hulk, right? We've all seen the classic Peter David Todd McFarlane issue where he's fighting the Gray Hulk, and we've all seen that cover. And he can actually hurt the Hulk because his claws can actually pierce the Hulk's gamma radiated hide, essentially. So even though Wolverine, is pint-sized, so to speak, incredibly dangerous, and he can pretty much take on virtually anyone. And putting aside the ridiculous blood of drop example Ian gave, he ultimately can walk away, often in terrible shape, but he can walk away. Now, the other key element of his mutation, again, he's like the perfect warrior and hunter, is his senses. There's many stories we've all read where Wolverine can track pretty much anybody, through their smell. Once he gets your scent, he knows he can follow you anywhere. His hearing, Wolverine can see at night like a predator. Basically, his mutation is created like the perfect killing machine, essentially, and the perfect hunter. So all these facets make him one of the deadliest beings in the Marvel Universe when it comes simply to combat, essentially. Now, let's talk about the Berserker Rage.
Oh boy!
So this appears pretty early on in the character's history in sort of bits and pieces, and they really start to explore it as we move along. But in the heat of combat, there are moments where Wolverine is susceptible to these all-consuming, they're often called the Berserker Rage, where he will basically kill anything in his path and within reach. Like a haze comes over his eyes, his senses, and it's just blood, and it doesn't matter who you are, friend or foe, if you're within reach of his claws, you're going to die, essentially. And oftentimes he comes out of it, he's both sickened by it, also feels exhilarated, like basically was on a drug trip in a sense, essentially. But when these rages happened, he's like an animalistic killing machine, essentially. Now, skilled writers, especially Claremont, will explore the toll this takes on his psyche when these events happen, and periodically throughout his history as a character. What do we think as readers of how they use the Berserker Rage in his stories?
Yeah, I don't remember reading any stories with it in when I was reading Wolverine. Gosh, that was with Jim Lee's X-Men run.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that makes sense because a lot of the times there's a Berserker Rage in stories before that era.
Yeah,
James.
And I just never read a whole lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's happened since significantly, especially in his own series. I'll think of actually when and this is way further along in his history than we're getting to today. But after he lost the adamantium, the Berserker rages tended to happen a lot more than they did previously because he himself was dealing with intense trauma, and it was much harder for him to control his rage. So he was essentially going feral. But I think, well, yeah, eventually he lost his nose. It's a long story. We'll get there some other time.
He literally regressed into something resembling the part ape, part Neanderthal.
Yep, that's right.
With a bandana on his
I
head.
forgot about
The
that.
do-rag. God.
But
I forgot about that.
yeah, that was not his best moment. But
No.
what I will say is that before that is that the Berserker Rage was used to excellent effect in his own series, and when it would happen in the X-Men, because as you said, Chris, he would then have to deal with the ramifications of it happening, even if at the time it was for quote unquote good purpose of trying to save people that he loved or whatnot. But if he's reached that point, it's very hard to control him.
For example, to piggyback on Ian's point, in the Wolverine miniseries we'll talk about later, the Claremont Miller Rubenstein series, there's a scene where he dispatches brutally a horde of assassins. He doesn't realize Mariko is watching him, and she is horrified.
Yeah.
And she runs away from him because she'd never seen him do that before. So again, in the hands of a skilled creative team, it really gives them the option to really explore, the price for his abilities. The fact that, like, if the world's like most addicted cigarette smoker, oh, I'm so happy I got to smoke a cigarette again. Then afterwards, you're like, oh God, what did I just do? Right. And that's a much more, benign example of what we're talking about here. But it's like there's almost like an addictive quality when that occurs. Like in the Wolverine story I just mentioned, he says something like, I feel sick. I feel great.
Yeah.
And then he sees her face. Great art by Miller Rubenstein. And her eyes are agog in horror, essentially. So
First time I read that too.
we'll get to that later. So look forward to your reaction. Now, so as we noted, because the healing factor, Wolverine's been alive, it's been established in origin since the late 19th century. Wolverine has fought in so many wars and been involved in so many conflicts. He's one of the most adept sort of warriors walking the earth in his time period, because he just has centuries of martial experience to draw from. In the First World War, the Spanish Civil War, the Second World War, the Cold War, you name it, as a soldier, as an espionage agent, as an assassin, special operations, he's done it all. So again, extremely dangerous individual. He's had samurai training, ninjutsu, all kinds of different martial arts. The master, I think it's pronounced Ogun, who we'll talk about, who trained him in Japan for a period of time. He's featured in the Kitty Pryde Wolverine miniseries later in the 1980s. So Wolverine's just his realm of experience, espionage, covert operations, the battlefield. And again, that's what was great about that Wolverine Origins movie. They kind of showed you elements of that as they moved from one era to the next. It's so key to understanding what makes the character so deadly, essentially.
Now,
go ahead, Shane.
Question. So, like, as we know, Wolverine did not remember everything about him.
Right.
Does he now know everything that he's lived through?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe now he does.
Like,
yes.
all his memories are unlocked. He can remember everything that ever happened.
Essentially, post-House
Part of the fallout from House of M.
Exactly. Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
Post House of M, because the whole point of House of M is that people were supposed to get, quote unquote, everything they ever wanted, which is why when House of M is occurring, Logan's literally the only one who remembers what happened, because all he's ever wanted to do is remember his past. Well, now he literally remembers everything, and that includes. I believe that also does include the fact that he still has some implanted memories that kind of makes it a little bit hard to distinguish what's real and what's not sometimes. But important stuff he 100% remembers now: his own name, how long he's been around, that sort of stuff.
And the implants also make it challenging to research the character because, again, for much of the character's history, and it was part of the fun as a reader. He didn't know everything, so we didn't know everything, or they'd reveal little snatches of things, as we're going to get to. So, for example, because of his travels, Wolverine is fluent in Japanese, Russian, Spanish, French, German, and Blackfoot Indian. So, for example, Classic One Uncanny X-Men 118. Here's one of those little tidbits they reveal. So they're in Japan. This is the classic Moses Magnum storyline, which is wonderful in that great Claremont Byrne run. And Magnum has unleashed a firestorm on one of the Japanese islands. And Logan picks up a newspaper, and Cyclops goes, I'm reading the dialogue here. You read Japanese? Wolverine, yup. Cyclops, I didn't know. Wolverine, you never asked.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the terse exchange is so key character, essentially. Now, let's talk about origin, both his actual origin and the storyline. So Wolverine is born in the 1880s in Cold Lake in the province of Alberta in Canada. His name is James Howlett. So, great, great panel you put up here, Ian. So his mother was Elizabeth Howlett, and he was born into wealth and privilege. So his father was a wealthy landowner, John Howlett, and his father's groundskeeper was a surly gentleman named Thomas Logan. Okay.
We might as well have called Red Herring, because
Yes.
in the early issues where he looks exactly the way the adult Wolverine does. And I think we're left to assume that perhaps he or perhaps his son, Dog Logan,
Yes.
never learn his real first name, either one of them might turn out to be Wolverine. But then we're thrown a curveball at the end of the second issue, and we learn that it's actually sickly little James Howlett. That he's the one who pops the claws. He's the one who's Wolverine.
So we'll talk. I'm just going to give a quick outline of that story, and we'll talk about a little more detail. So basically, James's mother, Elizabeth, she was traumatized because her first son had died. So she was neglectful towards her second child, which was James. Now, growing up on the manor, so to speak, James has two companions. Now, a young woman named Rose O'Hara was basically hired. I said it kind of like as a not a maid, but
a companion for
James.
James.
I said, well put, Murd. Okay, and she's the dead ringer for Jean Grey.
Of course.
Dead ringer. So the love for redheads starts very early on in Wolverine's history. So, and their other companion, as Bird mentioned, is Thomas Logan's son, who's just known as Dog, who was a more sort of rough around the edges, wild.
It's like a Huckleberry Finn.
Well
character.
put, Murd. Well put. Excellent, sir. Excellent. And they go on adventures, and the three of them are close. They're kids, right? They're experiencing different adventures.
Yeah.
Now, here's what happens. So, Thomas Logan, the groundskeeper, is a ne'er-do-well, and he and his employer, John Howlett, do not get along. Thomas Logan murders John, and this triggers James' mutation. And again, Ian has put these panels on the screen, and this is we first learn as readers, if I remember correctly, that the claws were bone; they were not adamantium. We should remind people that when this story came out, this was an enormous event in comics.
Yes, although we already knew that he had bone claws from the events of when Magneto stripped him.
I'm sorry. You're correct, sir. Thank you.
Wolverine number 75.
That's right. Thank you. My apologies.
Yep, Fatal Attractions.
Correct.
Yep. There were still theories swirling, especially in my own noggin, that those bone claws he popped for the first time right after Magneto sucked the adamantium out of them. There was still a possibility that those bone claws were just like simulacra provided by his super immune system. Like it was so used to those metal inserts being there that it replaced them when they were ripped out. But it never made sense to me that there was bone in the middle of those blades coming out of his wrists, because I mean,
I
they're
agree with
basically
you
steak
wholeheartedly.
knives. They're too narrow, too flat to hide bone. But still, that apparently at this point that became canon. This is our confirmation that the claws were bone first and coated with adamantium.
Indeed.
Well done. And this story came out, I want to say, in 2001.
Yes.
Yep.
And I mean, I was retail at the time. This was enormous. I mean, people were so excited to see what was going to go on, because as Ian mentioned, we never had the quote full origin of Wolverine up to this point, right? We had bits and pieces, what was true, what was misdirection, all of that. So that's what this story was supposed to address. Again, it's the wonderful Paul Jenkins writing, Andy Kubert on art. I'm looking at the trade. Bill Jemas put his name first.
I know he did. Yeah.
On the list of creators.
He's listed as plotter, even on Wikipedia. Bill Jemas plot, Paul Jenkins plot / script, Joe Quesada plot, and then artists Andy Kubert and Richard Isanov listed as the artists.
Yeah. I think I remember Jemas as being the one who insisted on origin being the only word to appear on the front cover.
Yeah.
But it's called Wolverine: Origin. Yeah.
Anyway, Paul Jenkins wrote the story. Okay, so Thomas Logan, if I remember correctly, I think Thomas Logan killed James's dog.
I believe
dog killed the dog, and so that's why his father confronted Thomas Logan and
kicked him off the manor.
And if I remember correctly, Thomas Logan was having an affair with James's mother.
I think so.
Yes,
it was
right.
Strongly hinted.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't come right out and say, little James is actually Logan's son, but since then, I think it's been confirmed elsewhere that Thomas Logan is Wolverine's biological father.
There's a lot going on in the story. So basically, when the bone claws pop out, James kills Thomas, so essentially kills his own father. As we can infer that essentially. And he attacks Scar's dog. Now, didn't everybody think dog was Sabretooth?
Oh yeah.
Right? Like that was totally it turned out he was not Sabretooth. That was what we were led to believe.
There was a time, I guarantee you there was a time when that was actually going to be.
Yeah.
Later on in the comics, Dog reappears as Dog Logan for a series of stories. So, and I think even those, I don't know, those actually kind of pissed me off because like it was incredibly unnecessary to bring him back at that point in time. Those were stuff that was written by Frank Thierry, great artwork by Sean Chen and Barry Windsor-Smith, but the story not so much. It had come out shortly after Origin. And, again, trying to tie things together. Is he Sabretooth? Is he not Sabretooth? Turns out he's not. And it was not worth it.
Now, so Elizabeth drives James and Rose. Rose remains James's companion off the manor. Suicide. So, I mean, Wolverine's, origin is just soaked in tragedy.
Oh, yeah.
And they then wander Canada as cousins. James and Rose. Rose christens James Logan to hide his identity, essentially.
There's an important point here. Logan, James, whoever he is, we learn that he suffers traumatic memory loss. Like right after the incident back at the manor where his father died and he kills his other father and his mother shoots herself and his mind blanks all of that out almost immediately. Rose goes to comfort him and he doesn't even know who she is.
Yeah.
And she later speculates because she's writing in her journal throughout this whole miniseries. It's a narrative device, and she speculates to herself maybe his mind is trying to heal itself in the same way that his body does. Maybe this is yet another extension of his healing factor. When he undergoes some intense mental or emotional trauma, his healing factor scabs over his memory and wipes the traumatized part of it clean. So he's suffering even before Department H or the Weapon X program, whoever gets around to implanting his memories. His memories are already naturally muddled from childhood on.
Did you get a thrill when Merge said muddle, by the way?
Yes, I was thinking not by the merge, just the muddle.
A loaded word, perhaps.
but that also just made the Weapon X stuff make that much more sense retroactively. That if it happened back when he was young, it would make sense that it would also happen in such a traumatic event where you're quite literally, injecting the man with adamantium. And whatnot, he's not going to want to remember that, so his body's not going to want him to remember that.
Now I have just a sign to the listeners because I'm getting emotional. I knew going to this episode that these three great men would help me carry the significant load of trying to navigate labyrinth of Wolverine's past. Gentlemen, I'm honored.
The Herculean,
Now,
to say the least. Yep.
We are but your shield bearers, sir.
Now,
Snickety snicked.
oh, shady poo. So they end up in a mining community, and James starts to mature now physically. He starts to look like Logan, essentially, like as we've come to know him. He starts to commune with wildlife, hunting with wolves. He starts developing his senses as a hunter and so forth. Now, Rose falls in love with, I think it's the head of the mining camp.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
if I remember correctly. Yeah, the foreman,
Smitty.
who's a kind man. And, James obviously has feelings for her, as he will with all redheads he meets, essentially. And so he's upset about that. And Dog resurfaces, and he's fighting Dog, and Rose is accidentally impaled and slain by Logan's claws. So to go back to Murdoch's point about his mind shutting down, he's just killed his first love. His mind shut down. So he becomes like the feral wolf-like Wolverine and flees off into the wilderness, essentially. So what we all think of? Have we all read Origin before this?
Oh,
or
yeah.
No.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
So what do we think of the story in general?
I have always been very satisfied with this as an origin story for Wolverine. I mean, I'd always had trepidations about any attempt that might eventually be made to fill in the blanks in Logan's past, but this one I found very satisfactory. It's just a good story, an enjoyable story to read, for one thing. It's basically a piece of Victorian literature that happens to be set in the Marvel Universe. I mean, it starts out in like Dickens, Austen, and Bronte territory, and then it takes a sharp left turn into like Bret Hart and Jack London along the way. But it's
and I agree with.
It's kind of clever how Jenkins weaves in little bits and pieces of Wolverine lore that we know later on. Like, for example, when he arrives at the labor camp, we learn Bub, the aforementioned Smitty, and his arch rival there, the cook on the camp, who is like his nemesis there.
Yep.
He uses the word knucklehead a lot, so that from that we can assume that he gets Canucklehead from that.
And I agree with everything Adam's saying. The only thing I want to add to that is, at the same time, when it was all over, I was like, oh, well, now we know.
We didn't know
there was
everything.
A little bit of,
Shane. There were gaps left.
oh yeah.
By
But there was
Jenkins,
just a little bit of sadness for me for that too, because now we knew some of the answers.
Well,
to
Shane,
everything we've
that's the
always
school of
asked.
thought that believe that it's always better to keep him more enigmatic, right?
But it was a
definitely that point
great
of view.
story, and it was a great event, like you had said earlier, Chris. It was very exciting and thrilling to read.
What'd you think, Ian?
I think I really appreciate the story origin. I do not appreciate how Marvel then tried to implement origin into Wolverine after the fact. That there was an Origins, that there was an Origin 2, that all of these things, attempted to fill gaps into Wolverine's history, when quite frankly, all we really needed was Origin. And if you're going to establish that Dog Logan is a character, just make him Sabretooth. It's scary.
Yeah, I don't understand that either.
It's staring you right in the face, and it actually just says to me, typical Marvel editorial edict, where, yeah, that would be good, but I don't know if I necessarily want to do it, so...
Yeah.
The
We're
character
going to go another way.
Wolverine needs more villains. Let's just give him more villains, like that, rather than just making it nice and streamlined and making that all make sense in the end. That is probably the one thing that the the X-Men Origins Wolverine movie did right outside of that that initial sequence. Montage is that they just streamlined it and had Sabretooth be part of his life for as long as he was. So yeah, that I didn't love the story itself, and especially the artwork. My God,
The art is breathtaking. It is breathtaking artwork. Absolutely breathtaking.
Some of the best artwork of the era. One of the best uses of digital inking and washing, especially along with the colors of that era. And yeah, I love the story as a standalone. I just wish they'd implemented it a little bit better on the character. That's all.
A nice page you've chosen, Ian, here, by the way.
Yep.
Showing James now, he's Logan, of course, so really coming into his own physically, in terms of his appearance. Now, so After this, because I feel it's my duty as in the helm of the spotlight to further explore the character's origin.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody, put your seatbelts on.
Oh boy.
Kick. Tray tables up. Okay, seats forward, because it's gonna be a very rough landing. Now, so this is retcon galore now. Like this is the part of my research. Like I usually love doing this. I didn't really enjoy this part because it was just like Ian said. It's a lot of like, oh, why did they do that, or they had to throw this part in, and it just got so convoluted. So basically, this is something you see with X-Men history. If they can't figure something out, they want to put a twist of things. We'll just put Mr. Sinister in it. just throw Mr. Sinister in. Everything's fine. So he's there. Okay, so. Ian, I think this is from the later Origin series that you were talking about, essentially. So, putting the pieces together. So, what happens here is that, so this feral Logan post-Origin after Rose has been killed. So, he draws the attention of Nathaniel Essex. So, also is he immortal or just long-lived? I forgot. Mr. Sinister.
Long-lived, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Functionally immortal. I mean, I shouldn't say that. He's the sort of immortal that will go on living as long as something doesn't kill him.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
By the way, Ian, the sheer disenchantment in your voice just then was awe-inspiring.
But because even that's complicated. Like, especially with the just ended Krakoa era and the many faces of Sinister introduced within that, and the many changes in Nathaniel Essex over the years. I'd say Mr. Sinister is just as complicated as Wolverine, possibly even more.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, the weariness in your voice of the longtime X-Men reader. Magnificent. So basically, Nathaniel Essex. So the late 19th century, Essex is involved in early genetic mutation, right? Like, is he kind of dabbling in like Darwinian ideas and things like that, for example, right?
Very much so, but carrying them to even further and more outlandish extremes than Darwin.
Right. So
and then he ran foul of En Sabur and
Apocalypse. Yeah.
Yes, and thus was his fate sealed.
Indeed. So Essex sends to kind of probe and test Logan. He sicks a polar bear on the wolf pack Logan had been running with, essentially. Now, the wolves are killed. Logan kills the bear. Now, this incident draws ready, Ian? This incident draws the attention of the Creed family.
Mm-hmm.
Saul and Clara, who, of course, are working with a circus. Murd, here we go again, back to the circus.
I've got an image of him in a cage for you right now. I'm going to be sharing by the other Kubert brother, by the way. Just as beautiful art,
Yes,
just
Adam Kubert, yep.
different style. Adam Kubert, I think, did a really good job in this series. It's just the series.
Yeah.
It's not exactly one of the.
This is Origin Volume 2, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so now it's right here in the notes. So long story, really long. I'm going to try to do it short. So basically, Logan kills Saul,
Mm-hmm.
who had betrayed Logan to Essex because he was jealous because his sister was in love with Logan. Everybody still with me?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, now.
Was she a redhead, by the way? I just need to
I
know.
don't recall if she's a redhead or not. I can't answer that question at the top of my head.
I'm just going to go with yes because it's all redheads. Continue.
So Clara, of course, who had befriended Logan and actually tried to help restore his humanity because he's in this feral state, she leaves him. Okay. So again, the early theme of everybody Logan loves leaves, either dies or walks off. So we find out the Creeds are mutants. So Saul had been a tracker like Logan, and Clara has a healing factor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, enter their older brother, Victor Creed, who, of course, we all know is Sabretooth. So he, of course, wants to avenge his younger brother and sister. So this is the beginnings, retro continuity-wise, of Sabretooth's profound hatred for Wolverine. So, again, just to make things clear, Sabretooth is not Logan's brother. He is the brother of a woman that Wolverine had loved. And here's Victor. Yep.
Not yet, anyway. They might retcon that.
Well, so that's in terms of retro continuity, that's where Sabretooth is. Now, I think it's fair to say that even before Origin, I think people theorized that Sabretooth was Wolverine's brother.
There was even a
Right?
theory
Yeah.
earlier on in the history of Wolverine. There was a theory that Sabretooth was Wolverine's father.
Father, that's right. That's right,
Yep,
Ian. Thank
yep,
you.
yep, yep.
That's right. You're right.
You're
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, and then later, as they appeared to be closer in age, that's when the idea of them possibly being brothers was broached a couple of times. But
And him as his father was part of, like, to go back to Shakespeare, was part of the fun of like trying to figure out what is Wolverine's origin, like what is his past. That was for the reader. That was sort of the fun part of it, essentially. And as Shane noted, that's lost now. So for some people, that was a disappointment. Now, okay, now major retcon, and this is stuff I'm getting from the official Marvel Wiki page for Wolverine. So around the time of these events, Romulus enters the story, who is this immortal being who looks sort of like Logan, if I remember correctly. I'm sure you could find an image you could throw up. I didn't mean literally regurgitate it because you're disgusted, but
like
on screen.
Like I said, the difference is that he has 4 claws. That's how you know that he's superior in every way.
Okay, so what we find is that here he comes. Oh boy.
I am Romulus. I have 4.
And my claws make even less sense than Wolverine's because
And
they're
apparently he's also into S&M. Like I don't know what's going on there, but it's quite an outfit. So basically what we're led to believe now is that he has manipulated the family line of Wolverine's mother, Elizabeth. So this leads us to believe that through this massive retcon that Romulus has had his finger on the scale, so to speak, of Wolverine's entire life. Now, this is just my own personal opinion as a reader. I hate when they do stuff like this because it strips away nuance, right? It's like, well, it's all this one guy.
Mhm.
And I rarely find stories like that satisfying.
The spider totem, baby. The spider totem.
Yeah, spider totem, exactly. Oh boy. Okay, so
That's another spotlight.
yes.
Yeah.
We did those back in 2012. So, all right. So we'll put Romulus aside for now. He'll pop up periodically. So basically, after the situation with the Creeds, Logan starts traveling hither and yon. This is when he starts to gather a lot of his skills and his experiences. He goes to the world. He goes to Japan. This is where he encounters the Hand initially, of course, the mystical cult of ninja assassins that Miller created first in Daredevil. Most Marvel readers know who the Hand are. The classic red outfits. I have to go back, by the way, because it was so thrilling when they did this. In the Netflix Daredevil series, when they first have Daredevil fight a ninja hand assassin, you guys remember this? And he has the red
if it's
outfit.
in season 3, no.
Okay. I forgot what season it was
I think it's before that, though. I think it's in season 2.
I think it's season 2, but he has the red outfit and he has like the weapons. It was so well done. But so Wolverine's history with the Hand is established way back. Now, he encounters Victor Creed. They have battles. I'm summing up a lot of stuff here, basically. He goes to Madripoor, which we'll talk about later, which is like the Casablanca of the Marvel Universe. People who watched Captain America and Winter Soldier should be familiar with that to some degree. In Madripoor, so this is like pre-World War II, he meets Seraph, who is the owner of the Princess Bar, which is like Rick's, essentially, in Madripoor. And he has a lot of adventures there. Again, Seraph, retcon, is also an operative of Romulus, and she teaches him various techniques of assassination and so forth. Now, a little bit of Madripoor. So we've all read Madripoor. I want to say first appears in the Wolverine series that began in the late '80s when he got his first long-running solo series. That's when they first introduced the concept of Patch, for example, one of Logan's many aliases. So basically, I'm going to quote Logan speaking about Madripoor. I smell it, even over the stench of the sewer. I know that smell anywhere. Smells like danger. Smells like life. Smells like Madripoor. I love this concept. So basically, Madripoor, it's south of the Indonesian Strait of Malacca, southwest of Singapore in terms of Marvel geography. Mm-hmm. It's a principality. Basically, you have Hightown, which is where all the wealthy elite live, and they kind of showed that in the Captain America the Falcon Winter Soldier series. Mm-hmm. And then you have the crime-ridden, impoverished Lowtown. So Madripoor is basically a home, like when you think about Obi-Wan talking about a wretched hive of scum and villainy, mm-hmm. This is Madripoor. So basically Madripoor has no extradition treaty with any other country. So any criminal can go to Madripoor and find sanctuary. So different criminal organizations, solo criminals, gangs, so forth, they all participate in Madripoor society. There's an elected chancellor that kind of runs the daily administration of the island, but it's basically a criminal city-state. And again, influenced by Casablanca, in my view. And it first appears, again, in that Claremont penciled Wolverine series in the late 80s. What do you guys think of Madripoor as a spot in the Marvel universe, essentially?
I mean, I think it's like it's like more disgusting Hong Kong, basically. Like they wanted to find something that was 100% a hive of scum and villainy, and that's what they created with Madripoor.
Kind of makes sense for the Marvel universe.
To Hong Kong or Singapore what Gotham is to New York City. You know, it's like the darkest, seamiest elements isolated and just plopped on the map.
Now bringing that up and Murd saying about Gotham just in a little bit. In my mind, the way that Wolverine's storytelling goes and what we learn of him, it does follow an awfully similar path to Bruce Wayne, just in a different way. Mm-hmm. It's not like Wolverine is rich, but he's traveling all over the world training.
Yeah.
Is there any thought or anything in articles that would say Wolverine was created around the same time Batman's darker popularity happened in the 70s and was sort of the antithesis or at least a comparative character?
My gut feeling is that they hadn't really thought of any of that yet. And it kind of, I think in Claremont's hands, they started to gradually develop all of that. But you make a great point, though, because when you think about the Bruce Wayne parallel, that really goes to the origin story where he's born into great wealth and he also experiences terrible family tragedy. Yeah. It just goes in a different direction.
Yep.
Like he has no Alfred.
No. Right? He has no one to temper him. No, you're right.
Which is funny because, of course, what happens in the Amalgam universe, the two of them combine into one and become Darklawds.
Yeah. Good point.
It is definitely easy to make the comparison between the two. I think that Wolverine, the main difference between Bruce Wayne and Wolverine is that even though Wolverine has had trauma, I don't think he's necessarily training in order to go back and
wage a war on crime. Yeah.
No, you're right.
That's not his mission.
Because he can't remember a lot. He can't remember a lot of what happened to him.
Exactly. Yeah, his mission is to just be Wolverine. Like that's what his mission is essentially.
Yeah.
What do you think of the portrayal of Madripoor in the Falcon Winter Soldier series?
Oh, I liked it in that. I thought it was fun to see.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see it, developed a little bit more. But I think it was pretty close to the Madripoor of the comics in essence. We just need more of it to really build it out.
Ian's put up a great still here of, again, you see the high towns, so the skyscrapers and all that, and you see the low town, which is more, where the riffraff live, so to speak. Now, okay, just keep your seatbelts on. Let's talk about Silver Fox. Okay, Ian knows where I'm going here. So this is stuff that comes out in the 1990s in the Wolverine solo series, but it's part of his origin. So basically, at one point, Logan returned to Canada, the Canadian Rockies, and he fell in love with a Blackfoot Indian woman named Silver Fox. After a period of time, Logan has happiness. They're living together in a cabin. I don't know if they have a kid or not. I don't recall. I know Wolverine's had a lot of children, actually, if you really look through his whole history. But basically, Sabretooth shows up and he murders her. Because he wants revenge for the death of his own brother, all retro continuity. Now, so Wolverine is his heart is broken again. His domestic bliss is shattered again. Now, when we get to the Team X, then Weapon X period, just try not to get too cross-eyed here. So a Silver Fox resurfaces, who's part of that team in that world, who apparently is not actually Silver Fox. I'm hanging on my fingernails right now, ladies and gentlemen. But because Logan's memories have been tampered with the various implants we've discussed, he thinks that she's the real Silver Fox, but she's actually not the real Silver Fox.
Okay.
Ian, jump in at any time.
You know what? At this point, your guess is as good as mine when it comes to this thing, because like they even did this story to a point in the original X-Men the animated series. They did the
That
cat.
was brave.
They did Silver Fox. Only somehow their version made a little more sense than the comic book version, probably because they had to condense it all into one.
Yeah.
And all that. But I don't know. This is one of the most confusing parts of Wolverine's story because of the whole is she, isn't she, or maybe she is, or turn the page and then all of a sudden she isn't. I don't know.
And I apologize because there's probably people out there who could do a better job of explaining this than I am right now. But based on what I've read of the past and just looking at the history, this is what I came out with.
Yeah,
essentially.
Yeah.
So, and I want to say the fake Silver Fox, we'll get to this in another part, has Mariko killed, if I remember correctly. Right? Doesn't she poison her? Or am I misremembering that? Because Mariko will die eventually.
Yes.
Spoilers.
Yeah, I mean,
Spoilers.
spoilers for comics from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
We'll get to it later, but all right. So moving on. So basically, after this, again, I'm condensing here. So I'll call this the Wandering Years.
I read that as the Wonder Years first.
So Logan works with the Hudson Bay Company as a fur trader. He's working with Blackfoot Indians, and he defeats a demonic snake. And the Blackfoot dub him Skunk Bear or Wolverine.
Mm-hmm.
And they give him a special Blackfoot ceremonial shirt. Enos to put up the image. This essentially is the model for his blue and yellow. This is all retro continuity. It's the model for his blue and yellow costume, essentially. So when we think of why he wears this color scheme, so in terms of the history, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
by the way, it was a assassin known as Reiko. And I'm sure we'll get to that later on. That dealt with Mariko. So if that is fake Silver Fox, then great. But the actual assassin's name is Reiko.
When I do the research for that, we'll uncover it. But
yeah,
to be determined. Okay, now Logan fights in both World Wars. There's different stories where that's covered. He participates in the Spanish Civil War. Great Larry Hama story where he was writing the Wolverine series.
Oh wow.
And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he fights. There's a couple issues where he actually meets Puck from Alpha Flight, who's also fighting on the side of the Republicans. I don't mean Trump's party. I mean the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War, trying to preserve the Spanish Republic against the fascists who were being led by Francisco Franco, who was backed by the Nazis and Mussolini. So there were foreign volunteers. This is the actual history. Went to fight for the Republican side against the fascists. There were Americans who were part of a unit called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, for example. So Hama puts Logan into that history, and he puts Puck into the history as well.
Wow!
And they're fighting on the Republican side.
Any idea how many issues that runs?
It's just a couple. I want to say it's in the 30s of that series in terms of issue numbers.
I didn't realize that.
Hama did have a very long run on Wolverine, so but it is definitely part of that initial like 30 or 40 that he was on.
They're really good. I recommend them. So forgive me, I don't have the issues in front of me. So. After World War I, this is also from the Origin 2 or whatever, one of those series. After World War I, he actually meets Mystique in Mexico. They plan an aborted bank robbery in Kansas City. Then she goes off. He then becomes a bootlegger. I thought this was perfect Wolverine for a period of time during Prohibition. And he fights in the Spanish Civil War. Then he fights in World War II. He's a Canadian paratrooper on D-Day. He's also chucked for a period of time to the Sobibor concentration camp as well. So he experiences that. The Wolverine, his history is so extensive, and again, if you have a good writer that can really play with that history and extract new stories that just put him in different circumstances. I mean, the Logan miniseries by Brian K. Vaughan is wonderful. For example, that's where they take Logan to Japan. So, in these adventures, again, all retro content. I mentioned he meets Puck, Eugene Judd, Bucky, or
35 and 36. By the way, it looks like that was with Hama on the writing and Silvestri on the artwork.
Now,
what were they again? What were the issues?
35 and 36 of the original. Okay. Yep.
Now let's pause for a minute. Let's pause. I'm filled with emotion because Ian Levinstein once again is the producer extraordinaire. You hear, ladies and gentlemen, producer extraordinaire. Now, so in this period, he meets Natalia or Natasha Romanoff, who will become the Black Widow. Blade, apparently, which I didn't know about. We mentioned Puck. Bucky, Captain America, Nick Fury. Now, we've probably all read Uncanny X-Men 268.
Oh yeah.
Which is one of my favorite all-time issues in
I
the
did not
history
get
of
to
the
that,
X-Men.
and I haven't read it, but I'm going to.
That's okay. Oh, Shane, you'll love it. So it's a Claremont Jim Lee story. I'm sure we talked about when we did our X-Men spotlights back in 2013, I believe. But Claremont goes to Madripoor of the early 1940s. And I think it's right before America enters the war, actually. And Ivan, so Natasha's, her guardian, she's a child, and Baron von Strucker is there and working with the Hand to try to abduct her. And Logan works with Captain America and Ivan to save her. It is a classic story. Ian, I'm sure you read it. Murd, have you read the story?
I'm pretty sure I haven't.
Oh, Murd, you'd love it.
I recognize the cover, though.
Yeah, so I won't spoil it too much then. But if you love fusing history with like the Marvel universe, this is a great example of that. Claremont writes a humdinger here. It's so well done.
There's also a more recent miniseries called Madripoor Nights that goes.
Which I've not read yet. Yeah.
That goes further into this portion of Wolverine's history with Black Widow and Captain America involved. That is highly regarded.
Claremont wrote that as well. I actually missed it. It came out, I think, just last year.
Yep, I believe so.
Wow.
So I'm waiting for the trade on that. But if you like, obviously, being a student of World War II, I just ate this story up even as a kid when I got it, and it still holds up really well. Shane, Murd, I think you both love it. Okay. And also, Claremont really captures Captain America's voice well because it's Steve early on as Captain America. He's not totally confident in his role yet, and they sort of capture that as well. And there's a great first meeting between Steve and Logan, where they meet in the Madripoor, in the Prince's Bar for the first time. It's really well written. So highly recommend that. Now, he then goes to Japan. He meets Lord Ogun, who we'll see in the Kitty Pryde Wolverine miniseries in the 80s, learns the ways of the samurai. And he marries in Japan a woman named, Logan has a lot of women, a woman named Itsu. They have a child. Now, who is that child, Ian? You probably know this.
Oh, was that God? What's his current name? I'm trying to think of what his current name is because they just changed his name, but to Ken, right?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which means mongrel.
Yes, which is why they're not calling him Ken anymore. By the way,
Now
I'll have to look up what the current name for him is.
And he becomes Dark Wolverine much later on.
Yes,
right.
So. Hero is his real name, and I at one point he became Helverine, but that's a whole other situation.
Sure. So anyway, basically, retro country again. Itsu is murdered by Winter Soldier on Romulus's orders. So that character appears yet again. Now, I note parenthetically, due to his long lifespan, Logan has many children.
Yes.
Probably more to be revealed down the road as we move along. Okay, so eventually, go ahead.
I said, the man has everything. He really, really does.
Now, so let's fast forward to the 1960s. Logan returns to Canada. He joins the Joint U.S.-Canadian Weapon X program. He joins the CIA's Team X, which is a Black Ops covert action team. He is working with Sabretooth. I guess I don't remember why they're able to coexist, but maybe he's forgotten that Sabretooth is the person who attacked him in the past, I'm guessing. The fake Silver Fox is there. We all remember the character Maverick from the 1990s.
Absolutely.
You want to say anything about Maverick, Murd?
Huh?
You want to say anything about Maverick? Or
just that he was the favorite character of one of the more annoying people I've ever known. Yeah, that's I can't distinguish Maverick from Brian Withers. He was 2 years behind me in high school. He ran on the cross-country team with me. He worked at the Christmas barn, no less. He was a comrade of sorts, but a hyperactive and annoying one. But he loved his Maverick. He did every appearance obsessively.
Oh boy,
that was I'm so happy right now. Oh my God. Okay, so his memories of this team are manipulated. These are all, again, like I said before, these are all stories in the 90s that were coming out, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Essentially, I'm just putting them in chronological order. Now, He quits Team X and he joins Department K of Canada. He works as a Canadian intelligence operative. This is where he meets Richard and Mary Parker, Peter Parker's parents, because they're intelligence agents. So if you go to the Untold Tales of Spider-Man -1 issue,
Ooh.
they have a story about him working with Richard and Mary Parker. This is also where he meets up. He has an adventure with Nick Fury. This is also where Wolverine meets Carol Danvers.
Ah,
They have a relationship because they were both in military intelligence as well, which is referenced sometimes in the main X-Men story. So Ian's bringing up. Yep, there we go. That's from looks like that's from Untold Tales of Spider-Man -1, if I remember correctly.
yeah, indeed, yeah, and the Parkers, shockingly, Peter's father looks exactly like Peter.
That's how that works.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if I remember correctly, to be fair to the continuity, I want to go back to the early Amazing Spider-Man annual in the 60s, where the origin of Peter Parker's parents. And I think they established even early on that they were actually intelligence agents.
Yes,
I
that is.
thought so. Yeah.
That was not retro-con. That goes way back to Stan Lee to give him credit for that. So they elaborate on that. So basically, Wolverine knows everybody because he's been alive for so long. So
He walks in and
everybody-
goes, "Hey."
Walks
Now-
out the street. He's like, "Oh, hey, Bill. Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
Oh, great grandfather Carl doing. You know?
Yeah.
Now, all right, Weapon X. So we all remember the Barry Windsor-Smith miniseries, which was in Marvel Comics Presents.
Yep.
I want to say late 80s?
Yeah.
Wrong on that. So
91.
91. Thank you. So this fills in a big gap in Wolverine's pre-origin story in that how did he get the adamantium embodiment on his body? So the artwork in the story is stunning, absolutely stunning by Barry Windsor-Smith in my view. And basically it's when we think of the Wolverine with like the big helmet on his head that he can't see and all the wires coming out of him and all of that exactly. That's from this story. So this goes into how the adamantium was bonded onto him by the mysterious professor, Dr. Abraham Cornelius, and Dr. Carol Hines. So if anybody has not read this story, it's a very important part of Wolverine's sort of history, so to speak. Personally, I think Barry Windsor-Smith is a better penciler than he is a scripter. That's just me. But he's one of the great masters, and anybody who enjoys his art, definitely pick the book up if you haven't already. Anybody read Weapon X here?
I have. Yeah.
Ian, what'd you think?
I love it for what it is. I will agree with you that the artwork's a little stronger than the story, but it's integral Wolverine reading just to get how the adamantium got on him in the first place. As you said, the image of him with the headset is an image that's set in time and has been used in so many different versions of the character over the years, whether it be the movies.
They even put Hugh Jackman into it for one scene, if I remember correctly.
They did, yes. I think in X-Men Origin, actually no, I think it was X-Men X2, if I remember correctly.
I felt it was the X-Men. The 80s one or the 60s one? I don't remember. One of those later films.
I think it might even have been the 90s one, like the Dark Phoenix movie.
Yes. You're right. Well, because I'm thinking of the scene where he's having like a flashback in his head.
That's true.
To the actual Weapon X situation in one of the earlier movies, but you are correct. He is actually straight up in the headset and the Weapon X garb in Apocalypse, if I remember correctly. As like a last minute guest appearance.
Yeah, it's a
blink
you'll miss it cameo.
Oh,
now, so obviously being the bonding the adamantium to him is an incredibly painful experience, drives him completely out of his mind. So he goes feral again. Intense brainwashing. He escapes. Now, retcon again. The Winter Soldier apparently facilitated his escape.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know this story where he's discovered wandering the Rocky Mountains in this feral state by Heather and James Mack Hudson, who are on their honeymoon. Okay. Now, this brings us into like the more established sort of Bronze Age continuity that starts to begin with the X-Men story. So the Hudsons help him regain his senses.
Mm-hmm.
Does Logan fall in love with Heather too?
Yes, because she's a redhead.
Okay, I thought so. All right. So as many listeners know, of course, James and Heather become the founders of Alpha Flight. James is a Guardian?
Weapon Alpha first,
Okay.
and then Vindicator.
Then Vindicator. He is temporarily killed in Alpha Flight 12.
I believe
classic
so.
burn run.
Yep.
Then she takes up the armor. He comes back later, though. Now, so Logan's memories are deeply impaired at this point. So he thinks the claws are artificial implants. He doesn't realize they're part of him. And he's now now we're into Hulk 181. Now he is in superhuman operations for the Canadian government. So we're kind of back to where we started, essentially, with this history.
Yep.
Woo! I got to take a swig of Fanta. Excuse me, everybody.
Well, and while you're doing that, so Marvel Comics Presents with Weapon X starts in issue 72 and looks like it goes all the way to 84.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's only
Yeah, it was-
little
wow.
8-page segments, though.
Yeah, that was the
Oh,
bi-weekly
okay.
Marvel Comics Presents.
Okay.
Yep. And each issue consisted of like 4 different 8-page stories.
It's a fun anthology book in the 80s. I loved it as a kid.
It
Well,
was
I just tagged it so I can look that up later.
They eventually collected it as their own trade, and also I think recollected it as like special editions that were just larger format versions of it, just all as that series rather than Marvel Presents. But you can get the trade very easily these days.
Okay, so in 2012 episode, I'm doing a job here, and I hope you don't mind. We're doing episode when we were part of CGS, episode 1379 was X-Men in the Bronze Age.
Yep.
Mhm.
So go back to the other show if you want to listen to that, where we do the overall history of the X-Men in the Bronze Age. Now we're going to focus on the Wolverine part of that, essentially. So, Ian, bring up the image. Wolverine quits Canadian service, please.
Yes, indeed. I've got that for you.
So this is from Giant Size X-Men 1. Notice this headpiece now is what we're more accustomed to.
Yep.
So this is 1975. So when Xavier, we all know this, Xavier travels the Earth to gather the new X-Men so they can go rescue the old X-Men who are stuck on Krakoa. Right, from Giant Size X-Men 1. Now, here is the Wolverine we know in terms of his temper. He's now talking more like the Wolverine that we're accustomed to. And he goes off with the man he's eventually going to call lovingly Chuck. Now, so if you go to Wolverine Makes Friends, please,
Yep.
Ian. This is from Giant Size X-Men 1, page 4.
Giant Size X-Men 1, page 4. Let me see if I could find it here. Wolverine Makes Friends. I don't know if I actually have that particular one, but anyway,
Sorry about that.
continue and I'll see if I can
So
find it.
basically, what I'm emphasizing here is in these early stories, this is the more one-dimensional version of the character. He's surly, he's antisocial, he's incredibly temperamental, dangerous to friend and foe alike. He doesn't like to take orders. He's obstinate, just a general unpleasant person to be around.
Oh, you know what? I
So-
think that's technically X-Men 94. Not, or at least that's what you had it listed. So, yep.
My mistake, then I apologize for that, sir.
Okay.
My apologies.
I've got the image. There we are.
So here he almost gets in a brawl with Iceman. And what I like right off the bat, though, is that Cyclops automatically takes Wolverine's measure. And he established that I'm not going to put up with you. And right then and there, their love-hate relationship is established.
Oh, yeah.
Essentially. So now, if you go to X-Men 96, Ian, Wolverine punches Scott, which you were noting before.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yep.
That image.
That is a good one. Yep. X-Men 97, to be specific, I believe. And
I really blew my numbers here. I apologize.
no, it's fine. Or I have the shut up image if that's the one that you're speaking.
Yes, that's it. That cuts it, bub. Those clowns try to stomp us, and you just stand there and watch them fly away. What's the matter, Hotshot? Like you gutless or something? Wolverine, shut up! And he punches him right off his feet.
You know,
Now-
I think a really good leader is always the one that deals with his subordinates by literally punching them. I think that's absolutely the way you want to treat with just people on your team. That
All right, Ian, but let's show evolution.
Uh-huh.
Go to the Wolverine Scott image, please, which is a little later on in the series.
Yep, I see that. Got
This
it.
is the burn period.
Uh-huh.
So this is the classic Proteus story. I'm Cyclops now. We have to know who Mutant X is, what his powers are, strengths, weaknesses, needs, how he thinks and feels. Could be the difference between victory or defeat, life or death. You know I'm right, Wolverine. I know, but I don't have to like it. And he cuts the table with his claws. So what's interesting here is that Wolverine begrudgingly acknowledges that Scott is the leader.
Yes.
And he will do what he says.
Yeah.
So I've always loved the dynamic. It's fantastic. Now,
yeah.
so issued X-Men 96, Wolverine nearly slashes Kurt for laughing at him during training. You see this often in the early appearance of the character. Where it's almost like he's going to explode at any moment, in any circumstance, even with his own friends and allies. So, Murdough, do you have a comment on that?
Well, just for the first couple of issues of the all-new, all-different X-Men, Thunderbird was kind of cast
Yes.
in the role of Team Hothead. But when he bought the farm in issue number 95, Logan kind of instantly steps into that role on the team. That might be one reason why Thunderbird didn't last longer than he did, because he was a little bit redundant. And they only really needed one irascible, uncooperative, antisocial team member. And so Wolverine got to kind of inherit the hothead role in addition to his other negative personality traits.
Indeed. But to Claremont's credit, very quickly, he starts to dig into this character a bit. For example, from X-Men 98, many of you have seen the classic splash page. It's Christmas in New York City, and the X-Men have gathered to celebrate the holiday. I think they're at Rockefeller Center, if I remember correctly. And Jean Grey is trying to get everybody in the spirit of the holidays. And she asks, Wolverine, what are you going to do? And he says, what about me, Miss Grey? I got no use for Christmas. And he kind of goes off by himself. So that brooding loner. Now, in that same issue, they reveal that his claws are part of him because they're captured by the Sentinels. Many listeners have read these stories. And when he breaks free, because he doesn't have his costume on, he's just in street clothes, and the claws extend from his hands, his knuckles, and he breaks free. Now, I'm reading here from Claremont in back issue number 4. Dave said Len thought Dave meaning Cockman said Len thought the claws were in the gloves, and he and I both agreed. Why? If they're in the gloves, then anybody could wear the gloves, Claremont told back issue number 4. We needed something that made him a mutant, something that made him unique. The claws are obviously artificial. If the claws are part of the glove, what made him a mutant? The reduction of the equation was what makes him a mutant is the healing factor. But if he has a healing factor, what about the claws? Well, let's make the claws part of him. The healing factor enables him to survive with the claws. Dave and I thought, this is cool, we'll run with it. So, again, how things develop on the fly, things evolve, they morph. But again, it's the mark of a great creative team. They saw an opportunity, they took it in a direction that was much more satisfying, I think, for the readers. Because it adds more mystery to the character.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like that, if it had just been claws that anybody could wear, then he could literally hand his claws to Kitty, and then she could do something cool. But no, it's specifically a Wolverine thing. There's nothing, nobody else that can do it.
Oh, speaking of building the mystery, and this issue in number 98, and that same scene, actually, when Stephen Lang has the X-Men captive, some of his technicians are scanning Wolverine. So at the same time they learn that the claws are a part of him, they theorize that Wolverine might not even be a true mutant, because the readings they're getting off of him are so different from the other mutants they've captured.
That's right, Murdough. I forgot about that. Well done.
And this is a part of, one possible and ultimately rejected origin for Wolverine, namely that he's not really mutant or human at all. He was a real Wolverine who was accelerated, evolved by the High Evolutionary into it. So basically, Wolverine would have been a new man as opposed to a mutant. But they scrapped that idea fairly early on.
Thank God.
Mind you, the whole evolve from wolves thing is essentially scrapped, even if they have established it in the comics, because it will never be mentioned again because it was that stupid. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, again, one of the fun parts of the lengthy Claremont run, there's all these like tributaries and eddies off from the main plot lines that sort of go in other directions, and sometimes they make their way back to the main plot. Otherwise, they just vanish off into the ether. In some cases, as you noted, Ian, that's for the best.
Oh, yeah.
Now, another great moment in this issue, again, Logan is obviously drawn to Jean Grey, and Jean has her night dress, her evening wear on because when she was captured by the Sentinels, and he just tears it off her so she can fight more easily, establishing his cavalier attitude about her. Now, I'm quoting from X-100. You see, folks, I'm like an animal. I don't know from scents, voices, feelings. I also know Jean Grey. And lady, whatever you are, you ain't Jean Grey. That's when Lang has the robot X-Men that they have to fight in that classic issue. So they establish Wolverine's senses early on in these stories as well. Again, we've been establishing Wolverine's origin through retrocontinuity. This is what readers are reading chronology in the late 1970s. This is what's being revealed to them, essentially. When Jean we all know the story, she has to pilot the space shuttle through the solar flare, that's when she meets the Phoenix. And Wolverine tells, it's suicide, Jeannie. He's already calling her Jeannie, right? He already had that affection for her early on, essentially. What do we think of the Wolverine Jean Grey attraction?
I mean,
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I enjoy it too, Shane. I think that it adds a wrinkle. Nobody.
Yeah.
When it comes to comics, it's like if it's easy, if a relationship is easy, then a relationship is boring for the most part.
Well,
when you introduce a wrinkle into a relationship like Scott and Jean, that Wolverine also has feelings for her, similar to how Morrison did later on, where he introduces Emma into the situation with Cyclops and Jean. It adds an extra layer. It adds an extra will they, won't they to the whole situation.
It's not only an extra layer; it humanizes Wolverine to a level that we don't always see, being berserker, feral, hunter, assassin. Yet when Jean's around, he calms down. He shows his softer side. And even to that point, I think even though he would love to have Jean over Scott having Jean, if there's something that Scott needs, he will do it to satisfy Jean because that's how much he loves her.
Yeah. And well put, Shade, and to buttress your point, when Phoenix emerges from Jamaica Bay and then she's brought to the hospital, Wolverine brings flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's kind of like feels uncomfortable. He kind of tosses them aside. But they establish early on, to go back to Shane's point, he has feelings for her.
Yeah.
Now, as the years pass, they establish that she's also drawn to him. Like there's the sort of like the, for lack of a better term, like the more animal adventurous side of her.
The bad boy.
Yeah,
the bad boy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, all right, Ian, please go to Wolverine Kills Guard.
Yes, indeed.
This is a key moment. Key moment.
While he's bringing that up, let me also interject
Please,
that X-Men number 100 was the first occurrence of the Fastball Special.
Yes. Well done, sir.
Yes, where
I always enjoyed that.
There's bodily picks up Wolverine and hurls him at a foe.
There's some great statues of that.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it's something that's been used to such effect by Colossus, but also by other people over the years in similar situations. It's great. And
the thing about effective is you're basically hurling a metal missile at an opponent. Now, what's Ian put on the screen, I think this is a key moment, I think, in the character's development. This is X-Men 116. This is beautiful Byrne, Terry Austin artwork. This is the cream of the crop stuff here. And this is their adventures in the Savage Land. We talked about this in those spotlights years ago, where they're helping Kazar and the Fall people. Well, is it Garrock the Petrified Man, Murd? Is that the enemy?
Yeah, I think so. And Zaladane, his priestess.
Yeah. So they're infiltrating their stronghold, and there's a sentry. And Nightcrawler wants to take him out peacefully, and Wolverine says, no, we have to do this quick and quiet. Now, what's wonderful about this panel, you don't see Wolverine kill the guard. You just see Nightcrawler and Storm's horror and revulsion as they watch him kill the guard. And Storm thinks, thought balloons. He's like the great cats on the veldt. When he strikes, there is no mercy in him. And Nightcrawler just goes, mein Gott. And you hear the snikt. Now, to me, this is one of the most important panels in the character's history.
Mm-hmm.
Because it establishes pretty early on, Wolverine will take life if he deems it necessary for the mission.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Which makes him different than pretty much every other X-Man, for that matter.
Yes, and different from most any other superhero in Marvel Comics at that time. Nobody killed.
Yeah.
I mean, the Punisher had been introduced, but he was kind of off on his own thing, essentially, and he was just doing guest appearances at that point. But this is a main character in the main book. He just killed someone, which, now I'm bringing this up because let me read Claremont's point about this. The idea was Wolverine was not like the other X-Men. He is when the necessity arises, a stone killer. Nightcrawler is not. Storm is not. She has killed, and it's haunted her ever since. Wolverine, then requires, will go out and kill somebody. End of story. Don't think twice about it. This is a bone of contention with Jim Shooter. Wow. End quote. And then he goes further. This is back issue number 4. Shooter's feeling was X-Men don't kill. And he wanted us to establish that all the Hellfire guards and the Savage Land guys were still alive somewhere. So ridiculous. They were banged up really bad, but he hadn't killed them. Whereas
they had ouchies.
Whereas I think both Byrne and I felt that it was very important to establish that Wolverine had this inner lethality about him that marked him as different than the rest of the X-Men. And also, from a sales point, let's face it, once they established Wolverine was killing people in the 80s, it became one of the biggest characters in Marvel Comics.
I got 2 things for you here.
Yeah.
One, clearly just add a parachute and let them know that they're, when they're falling out of the plane, they're going to be perfectly fine.
I landed safely next to this naturally occurring fireball.
That's Cobra Troopers.
Number 2, it's really interesting that you chose this specific quote, and specifically from Jim Shooter, because why did Jim Shooter want to kill Jean Grey? Because according to him, superheroes don't kill, and that's why he felt that the Dark Phoenix had to die at the end of the Phoenix Saga.
And I will say, I think he was right, because I think it made the story that much more powerful when she did die.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Until they retconned it later on with X Factor. But
yeah.
Now, I'm running through some quick highlights here of the character's Bronze's history. So in X-Men 118, he meets Lady Mariko Yoshida for the first time. Even put up the Mariko image. Uh-huh. Now, classic, she is the exact opposite of Wolverine in temperament, disposition, worldview. She's a elegant, refined, essentially a noble woman. And what's great about these panels is that Wolverine is gentle. He's soft-spoken. And again, Claremont's giving us bits and pieces. Wait, there's a lot more of this character than we actually think. Essentially, he speaks Japanese. Now he almost reveals his name in the last panel here. You'll notice that, and they stop because the next panel they're going to be attacked by I think mandroids, if I remember correctly. Now,
although let me
please, sir,
Chris,
please.
We the readers already know that his name is Logan, because the first mention of that occurs back in Uncanny X-Men number 103, which is part of a 2-parter where the X-Men are fighting Juggernaut and Black Tom at Cassidy Keep.
Oh,
and there are leprechauns there, and the leprechauns refer to Wolverine as Logan.
Yep.
Well done, sir. I totally forgot
it.
And Logan is surprised.
Well done, sir.
Marshmallows. I'm sorry. Did these leprechauns have marshmallows murdered or no?
It's a weird story. It's a weird story.
Nobody was
after me Lucky Charms.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm happy to hear it. But
clutch. I totally forgot about that. Well done, sir.
To go with this one more time, to bring back up the image, part of me wishes that if they were to do a second take on this artwork, that they had him remove the cowl. I think that would have actually driven home the humanity in this moment here that much more. And then, when the mandroids attack, he could easily put it back up. But I think that seeing his full face would have actually been very effective in this particular set of panels here.
Good point.
Very good director's note, Ian.
Yeah, excellent. And obviously the cowl frightens her.
Yes.
Initially. But then, of course, he really humanizes himself. Now, Murdough, I've totally missed that. Well done, sir. Again, I've mentioned many times, he just brought him a machine gun ammo. We're not going to be overrun now. Thank you, sir. Now, X-Men 120 to 121. This one, Wolverine reveals his full name to Mariko.
Yep.
As Murdough mentioned, we already knew that, but she didn't know that. So this one, Alpha Flight tries to retrieve. These are great. These are good. This is classic Claremont Burnworth. They try to retrieve Wolverine for Department H. Now, there's a great exchange in issue 121 where Wolverine has been, he escapes, but he's been temporarily taken away. He surrenders himself to spare the X-Men having to fight Alpha Flight further. So he sacrificed himself for his teammates, which the Wolverine and Giant Size X-Men 1 probably wouldn't have done. So that they've really further developed the character. Now, I'm reading the comments here. So like Cyclops is saying, "You're an X-Man, Wolverine. Your fight is ours." Wolverine says, "I appreciate that, boss, more than you know. But I ain't going to see my friends chewed up in my account." Colossus then goes, "Wolverine is not an animal, Cyclops. That man," meaning the Canadian soldiers, "then I'd have to treat him like that. Nightcrawler. They're not as lucky as we, Colossus. They know only the surface Wolverine. They know nothing of his true self." What's wonderful about that exchange is this is later, deeper into the Bronze Age run. They're well done. Oh, man. They're establishing that this is a complicated character who is growing, who is evolving. Because of his time with the X-Men, he's forging bonds with them, friendships. He starts to care about them, and they care about him. And they established that here. So, again, this is wonderful writing by Claremont. And in fact, as Ian notes in the panel here, Wolverine prevents Cyclops from beating up Northstar.
Yeah.
He stays his fist. He said, "I'm going to surrender myself." Damn good stuff.
This is another series, but this is another issue, by the way, that was eventually adapted for X-Men the Animated Series in the 90s.
Really?
Yeah, they do this whole Alpha Flight arc almost verbatim in the animated series. Obviously, there's changes to make it animated, but this did occur in that. Yeah.
How was it?
It was some of the better stuff. Obviously, I have to go back to it and rewatch it as an adult, but I remember enjoying it at the time, and it seeming like it was pretty much on character for both Wolverine and Alpha Flight. So,
have you read those stories?
Yeah, actually, I have, because I remember it was included in one of the X-Men trades that I had at the time. So yes, I have read them.
They're wonderful. Now, all right. Now this is the key moment. X-Men 133. Yep. Ian, please put up Wolverine Hellfire Club sewer image. Yep. Many listeners will be familiar with this.
I got you a cleaner copy of it because it is one of the best images of Wolverine ever put to paper. It's just so
sexy. Murd, do you want to say that in the proper voice?
Okay, suckers. You've taken your best shot. Now it's my turn.
I got chills. Thank you, brother. So anyone who's read Dark Phoenix knows this moment when what's the Hellfire Club guy who had the powers of density?
Oh, Harry Leland.
Harry Leland. He drives Wolverine into the sewers. The Hellfire Clubs assume he's dead, but of course he has his bones, right?
Yep.
He survives the impact, and he emerges from in the sewer water. I mean, it's great art by Byrne and Austin.
Oh, good.
The scum dripping off him. And this is Wolverine. For me, in my opinion, this is where we start to get the Wolverine of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
This is a solo moment, unleashed. And if you go to the next image, please, Ian, Wolverine X-Men 133.
Yep. Let me find that for you.
He takes on like the entire garrison of Hellfire Club soldiers in the Hellfire Club mansion and routs them. So the last one standing, he terrifies him into dropping his weapon. But what's great about these moments is that Wolverine, it's just him alone, and you see how deadly he is, how dangerous. The other X-Men aren't there to restrain him, and he wipes the floor with these guys. Now, you assume he's killed them. He's hacking them to pieces. But per what Claremont said before about Jim Shooter's dictate, these Hellfire guards will return later as cyborgs. Who have been restored because of how profound their injuries were.
Of course.
So, but this is for me, this is a key moment in sort of the character's development in terms of depicting him in all his ferocity. Now, Ian, please go to Forgive Me, Darling.
Oh yes. Oh, well, this is. I mean, talk about also seminal moments for Wolverine. This is up there for you. Yep.
X-Men 136. This is heart of the Dark Phoenix saga. Many listeners know this panel where Wolverine realizes, I have to kill her because I'm going to read his thought balloon. She's still too strong for us and getting stronger all the time. I got no choice. I got to end this now, permanently. Now, it shows, though, and Shane's run for this before, when it comes to Jean, he's all too human. And she tells him, do it, Wolverine, and he can't because she's become human. She's become Jean Grey again. essentially. Now, the terrible X-Men 3, didn't they try to kind of do this scene?
They did. They did.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think he did it in that, didn't he? Or at least he stabs her.
And it's been so long since
I can't remember.
It's hard to really remember how that one went.
That one's so mediocre. I don't watch it.
I haven't watched it more than once.
Yeah, and mind you, their quote unquote second attempt, which didn't have Wolverine in it, the actual Dark Phoenix X-Men movie that came out.
Oh God! Oh,
not too long. Talk about another missed opportunity.
That was a heavy lift, man.
Oof. Yeah, that was.
Well, I'd like to think I know, Ian, that you praised the Dark Phoenix animated adaptation they did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping someday they will, to quote $6 Million Man, we had the technology. I hope someday they will do the Dark Phoenix saga properly, because they can.
Well, let's get a move on, because we're not getting any younger.
Yeah, I hear you.
Shane, bringing some mortality into this, man. All right, so that's a classic moment again, the Jean Grey Wolverine dynamic. Now, X-Men 139 is the first appearance of, let's use Ian's term, the Earth Tone costume.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this is one of the great costume changes in superhero history. I love this costume.
What would you call it, Chris? If not Earth Tone, because I
always said brown and orange.
I always said brown.
But to me, it's just, when I think of Wolverine, I think of how menacing he is.
Yeah.
How dangerous. And I just think this costume better captures that feel. That's just me.
I agree.
But I want to read the dialogue. So, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, I can't do a German accent. I've been meaning to ask you why the new costume. Wolverine responds, why not? Xavier, Wolverine, call me Professor. Professor X, Professor Xavier, or even, if you must, Charles. But not Charlie. Is that understood? Wolverine. Sure, Chuck.
So and Professor X has a thought bubble with a little scribbly black line in it, just like Charlie Brown in the old Peanuts cartoons.
Exactly. But I think those exchanges, again, perfectly go to the essence of the character. Taciturn, brusque, right to the point.
And really his relationship with Charles as time goes on.
Oh, Ian, I'm glad, Shane, I'm glad you mentioned that, because the Logan movie, I think, captured that relationship so well.
Yes.
Yeah.
You really felt the respect and the love between them. And the comic, you're right, Shane, as the comic progresses, they capture that in the comic as well. Respect.
I made the mistake of seeing that Logan movie the day after my father's funeral.
Oh, Shane.
And I got to the car.
Oh.
I got to the car after the movie and I bawled. Oh my God. I must have sat there for 20 minutes crying.
Oh yeah.
And it came out on Blu-ray and DVD and I bought it. I have yet to be able to bring myself to watch it.
It's an excellent film.
Fabulous. It is one
really
of the best.
Done. It's absolutely
X-Men-ish movies.
It's a tour de force by both Jackman and Patrick Stewart, because
I think Patrick Stewart should have been nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Personally,
I agree with you.
He was tremendous in that film.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read Byrne's comments on because he designed this costume. He's speaking to CBR and earlier. I think this year, maybe I got the date right. Of course, unless they play football in Michigan, Wolverines are not blue and yellow. So I kept asking if I could come up with something more Wolverine-ish. Finally, Shooter relented and said yes. And I sat down in the bullpen and doodled up what I had in mind.
Wow.
So, his idea.
That makes perfect sense.
While we're on the subject of Byrne and Wolverine costume evolution, can I walk us back real quick?
Please, Smurd. Anytime.
To 1977, to the Iron Fist series, which at that time was being produced by a couple of gentlemen named Claremont and Byrne.
I highly recommend. It's excellent.
Yep. We got to mention Iron Fist number 14 because it's the first appearance of Wolverine's arch nemesis, Sabretooth.
Correct, yep.
He appeared outside the X-Men's world entirely.
But
then the very next issue, Iron Fist number 15, the X-Men did a guest appearance. And this would be the first time Byrne ever drew Wolverine, if I'm not mistaken. And Wolverine was wearing a costume that he had acquired in outer space for that issue. This was during the X-Men's
from the
Shi'ar Empire.
The Imperial Guard, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Where he was his own uniform was torn up in battle with
Right.
the Imperial Guard, and so he saw another guy, a guardsman named Fang, who was of a similar power set and appearance of Wolverine, and he looked like about the same size. So Wolverine just knocked him out and took his costume. And it was Cockrum. It was Dave Cockram's intent that yep, there it is, that be Wolverine's new permanent costume going forward. But John Byrne, who took over for Cockrum as X-Men artist shortly after this issue saw print, hated that costume and tossed it aside as quickly as possible. I guess Wolverine probably damaged it in this very battle that we're seeing here against Iron Fist. And when they got back to the X-Mansion, he discarded it as quickly as possible. And
although
blue and yellow.
The color scheme is similar to what Byrne would eventually settle upon. It's just I hate the necklace with the tooths and all and the teeth and all that. It just it doesn't.
The tiny little skull.
Yeah, it's not nearly as effective. I can understand why he decided not to go with that.
Yeah.
Murdough, is this from your legendary yellow legal pad?
Well, I'm afraid I had to use a white one for this, Chris. But,
Look at that hierarchy. Oh,
the principle is the same.
I'm home. I'm
the
home.
print.
Oh yeah.
Magnificent, Murd. Murd, well done. Thank you. Now, I want to mention to listeners, if you're a big fan of the Claremont Byrne team, I'm glad Murd brought it up. Their Iron Fist run is wonderful. Daughters of the Dragon. There's ties into the X-Men, Jean Grey. Like it's really well done. I can't emphasize it because it's right around the same time. So they're both firing on all cylinders. It's their first collaboration. It's excellent. So I highly recommend that. It's maybe like, I don't know, 15 issues. It's not that long, but it's really well done.
Here's a great panel, by the way, from that appearance with Wolverine. He will not escape us again. I don't intend to try. Listen, there's been a mistake. We have to talk. Heh. Wolverine don't talk, bub. He acts. You get my drift?
Right through Danny's ceremonial cow.
So good.
Gods of Kunlun! Great stuff. Now, something I wanted to point out because I thought it was very interesting because I found some interesting back matter on it is that X-Men 143, which is the Kitty fights the. It's clearly based on the alien, but the demon in the mansion, which is it's Byrne's last book issue on the run, actually. And they're going off to the city, and Nightcrawler, ever the Cavalier, the swashbuckler, playfully tries to kiss Mariko under the mistletoe, and Wolverine attacks him. Now this is after all the stuff we've been talking about, after the Dark Phoenix saga, and I bring this up because this is an example of how that's not the character anymore. That would have made sense like in Giant Size X-Men 1. And Claremont comments on it here. This is from the book The X-Men Companion. Toning Wolverine down, making him more rational, the rationale for this being that he could not have loved Jean, could not have experienced X-137, Wolverine's response was to grow up. Then after we set this process in motion, Jim, meaning Shooter, came in and demanded to know why Wolverine was being turned into a sissy. Evidently, what he wanted was for Wolverine to have the capacity to go crazy and kill, but never be allowed to kill. He wanted Wolverine to be as much of a potential danger to the X-Men as to other people. So he turned right around and had Wolverine try and cut Nightcrawler's head off over Mariko, which made no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
And this is Byrne. That's what Shooter wanted, this sense of a time bomb ticking away in the midst of the X-Men. This guy, at any moment, for any reason, could go off and he wouldn't necessarily kill a villain. He could turn around and deck Nightcrawler just for something to do. Then Cockrum. They're all commenting on this. When he attacked Nightcrawler for kissing Mariko under the mistletoe, come on. He knows these people are friends. He's not going to do that. I mean, that was no menace. That was probably done on Shooter's orders. Make Wolverine do something crazy. Personally, I think that was a bad choice. That's all inconsistent with what they've done with him. Now, think about this. I'm not going to, do an episode, pooping on Jim Shooter. He's a controversial figure. He did a lot of things I think that were great for editorial, like the way he supported Miller on Daredevil, for example. But he made other calls that were definitely more questionable and controversial. This, I just think, is a bad call. Like, trust your writer. Like, he's developed this wonderful character. You've got years now of this continuity. He's just not going to do that. It doesn't make any sense to the readers as well.
And to add on top of that, I'd say one of the best friendships in all of X-Men.
Elf. Let's get some beer, Elf. Come on.
Is Nightcrawler and Wolverine. It's tried and true. Whenever one needs the other one is there for them. And it's my favorite because you have the priestly Nightcrawler with the savage Wolverine. That they have common ground, that they're able to connect as individuals, and that they're always there to help each other out when they need them. It's just, this entire panel is just so contrary to everything that had been set up before and after that it's almost like it's a what if. Like this shouldn't exist in the comics. It's just not right.
Well put, Ian. Well put. Now, I also wanted to mention, because we've all read the original Secret Wars, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Shane, you've read Secret Wars, correct?
Yeah, once, but a really long time ago.
Now, it was written by Jim Shooter. If you go back and read it, notice how he characterizes Wolverine in the Secret Wars. It's not Wolverine.
Yeah.
He doesn't act like Wolverine. He is incredibly temperamental. It's like the stereotype of Wolverine that you knew from like the beginning is in Secret. You guys know what I'm talking about? Is in Secret Wars. It's not the character.
Yeah.
It's like Jim Shooter's version of the character that apparently he wanted, that he really wasn't getting in X-Men. So he put him in Secret Wars. And when you read it now, it's really jarring. It doesn't work at all. Like it's not the character. So I just want to bring that up as sort of like as a follow-up to what these creators were saying, these quotes I was reading. Now, a couple more things. Ian, please go to Uncanny X-Men 162 image, please. I bring this up because this is, I think, one of the best post Cockrum Burns stories Claremont did. It's the first Brood Saga story in the early 1980s. And obviously it's heavily inspired. Murr, do you want to explain who the Brood are? People, guess they don't know.
Other than nightmare fuel, you mean? Yeah, they are an alien race in the Marvel Universe. They are vaguely insectoid in appearance. They are colonial in social structure. They're a kind of a hive that follow a queen, and they reproduce not by the standard laying of eggs, but kind of in like John Ridley, H.R. Giger, xenomorph alien fashion. They implant other sentient beings with embryos, but rather than it just hatching out of the implanted host's stomach, the host is mutated into a new brood soldier, possessing all of the memories and attributes and superhuman powers in many cases, as the original host did, which is absolutely horrifying.
I'm sure in terms of body horror, this must have freaked you out immensely.
I friggin' hate the Brood, Chris.
Yeah. The Brood are, I think, are terrifying. Mm-hmm. They're obviously inspired by Alien.
Yeah.
But they talk, and they use weapons and technology, but and Wolverine refers to them as sleazoids. And in this classic story, again, to emphasize the healing factor, all the X-Men are infected, but Wolverine's healing factor, it's excruciating, actually rejects the brood egg. Yeah. And he's able to fight them. And this is classic Wolverine berserker right here. But there's a classic quote from the story where this is Wolverine thinking to himself, "I remember my hallucination about killing Kitty. If I have to, if she can't be cured, I'll do it. I'll kill them all, my friends. Then it'll be the sleazoid's turn." Again, a reminder of how brutal this character is when he has to be, and how he will harness his violence to serve a greater end. In this case, if I can't save my friends from becoming brood, I'm going to slay all of them. Essentially, if anybody who has not read this story, it's drawn part of by Cockrum, then part by the great Paul Smith. Mm-hmm. This is if you love great page, Ian. Yeah, this is his body rejecting the brood egg at the psychic and physical struggle. But if you're a fan of like the X-Men in space stories, this is a classic. Mm-hmm. It's really well. Murray, this must have freaked you out, this story.
Well, I haven't read all of it.
Okay.
I would like to mention that it's during this saga that Lockheed the Little Purple Dragon his first appearance. So that's the one issue of this that I have read because
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Nice. And yeah, like talk about. I mean, you say that they're inspired by by Alien and those specific designs. They are basically them. Like there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Marvel was like, well, we don't have the license, but let's do it anyway. Yeah, and that's exactly what they did with the Brood. Yep.
They spliced in a little bit of Wasp, I think.
Yeah, they put wings on them. Yep. And they can talk.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
One of the creepy things about the Brood, and Murdough know this, is that they enslave these mystical alien whales.
The
Akanti, who are highly sophisticated sentient beings, and they basically gut them mentally and turn them into these massive, like, organic starships. It's really creepy. Mm-hmm. When we get to the 1980s, there's a wonderful Brood story with the Australian version of the X-Men team, which is also really chilling when it comes to dealing with the Brood. So
it makes me ask this question, and I gotta throw this in there just as a what if. I don't know if it has happened in a what if or not. It probably has, but the question is, would a Venom symbiote actually be able to bond with Wolverine, or would his healing factor reject it?
They haven't done that yet. I'm surprised.
They may have. It's possible they have in one of the 800 Venom war stories. Years, so maybe it has already occurred, but I don't
remember it.
I would imagine that unless Wolverine himself is 100% accepting it, that his body would essentially force it out and stop the merger from happening, because it's a hyper healing factor. Like it doesn't let anything in. So yeah,
good point. All right, last thing we're going to talk about tonight is for me, this is my favorite Wolverine story. This is the eponymous Wolverine miniseries from 1982. As we all know, Marvel did a massive amount of miniseries. A lot of them really good in the 1980s.
Yep.
And this is one of the most important, the most famous. So this is Chris Claremont writing, Frank Miller, who's hot because he's doing his Daredevil run at the same time, penciling, Joseph Rubinstein inking. Now, for me, this is the miniseries that really starts to elevate Wolverine as a top tier, not just as X-Men, as a Marvel character, period. Mm-hmm. And we talk about the grim and gritty 1980s, Daredevil, Punisher, Wolverine. This harnesses that. So we think about like that zeitgeist in comics. I think this story is a key part of that, for me at least. Now, remember, Miller is doing Daredevil contemporaneous to this story as well. So, this classic hand image here on the screen right now. And Miller was incorporating film noir, martial arts into Daredevil with the way they fought with the hand. He brings that into this Wolverine miniseries as well. This is when the first appearance of Yukio, the Japanese assassin, becomes one of Wolverine's sort of femme fatales as well. But this is a story that really explores who Logan is in terms of the kind of man he is. I'm going to read Claremont's quote here. This is from back issue 132, so a more recent issue of that classic magazine. The interesting aspect of Miller's visual storytelling is that, knowing my rep, he would design the pages to leave lots of space for me to write. The joke of this was I looked at the art and thought, oh, the symmetry of all this action here and all this blank space there, I don't need to say anything. The art says it all. As the series evolved, I kept my mouth shut. There was no need to say anything in the crucial fights, especially the last fight, because the picture worth 1,000 words each. There was nothing for me to say. The point for Logan is, how will Mariko ever forgive him for killing her father, which is the climax of the story? The surprise for him at the end is that she does. The punchline is the last page where Mariko says, come to the wedding. The X-Men are like, holy cow. That leads to the two-part I did with Paul Smith. The point of the story is not the event as event, but the event as character. Mm-hmm. Well, that's refreshing.
Yeah.
Now, what do you guys think of this story?
First time I read it.
Shane?
I loved it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I got a huge G.I. Joe issue 21 vibe from it, with a lot of the sequential artwork.
Yes.
The ninjas and Wolverine and the hand fighting. It was beautifully done. I really enjoyed it. I was enthralled.
And you can see how it inspired the movie, The Wolverine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
By the way. Ian, I'm sure you've read the story.
Right here. With a bargain $9.99 book label still on it, I might add.
Nice. Nice.
I had the white one that you have, Chris, and
Yeah.
I think at one point I gave it away because I got this newer version, just because it was in better condition, and I went with it. And it also includes Uncanny X-Men 172 and 173 in the
We'll
trade.
talk about shortly. Yep.
But it is, I really enjoy Frank Miller on Daredevil, and it might be heresy for me to say this, but I think his artwork is better here. I honest to God do, and I think that Claremont's scripting.
Look at this. Look at this page.
Oh,
Look at that.
it's superb. It's absolutely superb. And
But give Rubenstein a lot of credit, though.
oh no,
Inking is also really important.
question.
Yeah.
Inkers, and yeah, I would agree entirely. This book proves just how important the inker is in collaboration. We've seen that with Romita Jr. when done by Klaus Johnson versus Danny Miki. Like it all depends on who else is there. But this is a perfect book in so many different ways.
Now, why do you say that?
It gets to the heart of the character. In ways that very few people have actually managed to achieve, all while at the same time, crafting this narrative that Wolverine is a lot more than the Killing Machine. He's a lot more than a man. He's a man with a mission, with a purpose, and with honor, and he's duty bound. Even when he has to do hard things, like, as you said, kill the father of a woman he loves. It's all about code, and it's been crafted for years, and it's so on display in this book. Not to mention that the Japanese part of Wolverine's backstory, I think, is one of the most important to him.
Yes, absolutely.
Just because it really just grounds the character, and it's why it also works so well in the movie just called Wolverine. The one that the second of the Wolverine solo movies. I actually really enjoy that one, especially the director's cut, which essentially adapts a decent amount of this story. But
I don't know if I ever saw the director's cut.
Track it down, Shane. It's available digitally. It actually is better because it's R-rated. While
I don't think I've seen it either. Now that I think about it, yeah.
The director's cut adds back in some scenes that were taken out because they would have ruined the rating. So it's basically a more mature version of the movie. But overall, yeah, this book achieves everything it sets out to do and sets up years to come of Wolverine as a solo character. Without this miniseries, we would not have gotten the ongoing Wolverine series, because it proved that it could be done, that he can stand on his own, and that he achieves it in so many ways. So yeah, great.
What'd you think, Murd?
Well, first of all, Snicked.
Oh, he's got the originals.
Oh, the original's beautiful.
Oh, right from the collection.
Yep, this is my version of popping the claws. And hey, there's 4 of them. I'm Romulus. Look at me. Yeah, I got all 4 of these at a yard sale.
Nice.
Here in 7 Mile Island for like a couple of bucks each, like 10 or 15 years ago.
Wow.
Nice.
They are worth more than that. And it's worth popping these up here because just look at the individual covers.
Yeah, the covers are fantastic.
Juggling my microphone as
First
I do
one's
this,
iconic.
but-
Yeah.
Yep, that one. Leaping into action.
I had that as a T-shirt as a kid. That second one, yep.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, these are emotional studies right here. These are portraits.
Yep.
They're not just what would have been the more typical action cutscene cover image, which would have been more typical cover fare of the time. This is before iconic covers, quote unquote, were done to death. This was something special at the time. Also worth noting the Comics Code Authority approval seal up there. So yeah, I am heartily behind Ian in my opinion that early Miller is good Miller. I like the artwork I'm seeing here from him a lot more than I like his later work, because I'm generally not a Miller fan. As far as Claremont's contribution, also a great example of what I would call 1980s neon noir.
Yes, well put, sir.
All
Well
those
put.
scenes in in Tokyo.
Yep.
A wonderful juxtaposition of shadow and color
Yep.
in striking ways. And Claremont, I'm glad that he held his tongue a little more here, because it's not only does it give Miller's art room to breathe, it's also more appropriate because he's fairly, curtain laconic. And there's a couple of scenes where the inner monologue gets a little bit too, poetic. I mean, it's decent writing, but it's not as well suited to the character. I liked the first issue where we open on Wolverine in the Canadian Rockies tracking a rogue grizzly bear, and so we get to see Wolverine in his element for a few beautiful pages before suddenly we turn the page and there's this giant black and white photograph of Mariko Yashida, and then that sends Wolverine off on this tragic quest into a world in which he knows he has no place and can never belong. He's a gaijin forever. He's just an animal dreaming he's a man. And just this, and then we kind of segue there into the classic folktale trope of the low-born soldier and the high-born lady, and Claremont and Miller openly acknowledge that this is derived from, centuries worth of storytelling by showing that little sequence of the old samurai tale of like a ronin who dares to love a highborn lady. And as Ian has said, this does a lot to grow and mature the character.
Oh yeah,
and to prove that he's suitable as a solo vehicle. He's not just the X-Men's resident bruiser and hothead. There are definite layers this miniseries will prove.
And you remind me of one great moment, Murd, when he tracks down the hunter who illegally shot the grizzly bear, and the grizzly bear then killed in his rage innocent civilians. This is classic Wolverine. The bear lasted longer, but I let the man live.
Yeah.
And again, that's great writing by Claremont, but that's again the essence of the character. And the quote I read in the beginning of this episode, where Claremont talks about Wolverine as the failed samurai, right? Trying to live by that code, like you guys mentioned, right? Trying to find grace, trying to find control, the battle between that grace and the animal within. That's the heart of the character. Now, Ian, if you go back to the I'm the man, I'm a man image again, please. That beautiful page of original artwork. If Pants were here, he'd be salivating.
Yep. Yeah,
it's another Rubenstein page.
But wonderful. Yeah.
But look at his expression. The artwork is gorgeous. Yeah. I mean, the serenity on his face, the fact that he's achieved some degree of inner peace with himself, that he's come to terms with who he is. Just in place people don't know, the premise of the story is that Mariko's father is I'm assuming he's a Yakuza lord. Basically, like he's
that's what I would think too.
Yeah, and they don't mention the word Yakuza, but it's implied.
Yeah, and he's a very powerful. Well, they're called an Obegon, the head of a Yakuza clan, and he has ties to Japanese industry, the government, and they have a great supporting character, Asano, who is one of Wolverine's friends from his days as an intelligence operative, who's trying to get him to help him because he feels that Shingen might actually be able to worm his way into the Japanese royal family in a sense. So there's big stakes here as well. But anyone who really is interested in the Wolverine character, if you haven't read this book, for me, this is the Bible of the character. I think this is the most important I think it's more important than Origin, Frank. I think it's the most important Wolverine story for me that's been produced. And again, I agree with Murd. This is I think some of Miller's greatest artwork, without question.
Oh yeah.
The combat scenes are stunning in this. Now, last thing we'll talk about, because it's getting late and some of you guys have to get up for work. So, following after this is directly this X-Men 172, 173, which is part of the classic. Many listeners, I'm sure, have read this. The classic From the Ashes storyline.
Yes.
From 1983. Poor Maddie Pryor. So, 2 issues in this are the X-Men go to Japan because Wolverine and Mariko are going to wed. Beautiful Paul Smith artwork. I'm a big Paul Smith fan. Sometimes he's overlooked, but a wonderful run on X-Men in the 1980s. Now, in this story, Mastermind comes back, Jason Weingard, and he, as part of his larger gambit to I'm not going to get into the whole Madeline Pryor thing, but we've talked about that in the past. But as part of his campaign, he mesmerizes Mariko, and he corrupts her, so she starts to bring her clan back into the Yakuza world, and she renounces Wolverine, says, I don't want to marry you anymore. And there's a classic panel where Wolverine, one tear cascades down his cheek as Mariko rejects him in front of the X-Men, essentially. These are great stories. Rogue is this when Rogue first becomes an X-Man. She has to deal with all the suspicion about her role, essentially. You got the Viper, Silver Samurai, all that intrigue. But it further explores the cost Wolverine has to pay as a man of honor, as you mentioned, when it comes to his relationship with Mark. Oh, incredible. Look at Paul Smith's artwork there.
Beautiful.
Incredible combat scenes with the Silver Samurai.
Yep.
Absolutely beautiful.
Not to mention in the previous issue,
the poison.
Yeah, talking about Wolverine's senses on display. Him realizing that it's poison right as Storm is drinking it, and it's too little, too late. But his senses are able to pick it up.
Now, for fans of Storm, quick little aside because it's just so much fun. These are the stories where she meets Yukio, the carefree assassin, former lover of Wolverine.
Yep.
This is what's going to influence her to take on her Storm Punk persona.
Okay.
Of the 1980s,
yep.
Which I thought was a great look. Now, the last thing we'll mention is that when Mariko was freed from the Mastermind's control, she so dishonored herself as the head of her clan that she tells Logan, I can't marry you until I've divested my family from all its Yakuza ties. So that's where we leave them in 1983. Right. So again, there's that sense of there's this deep love between them, but there's also the fact that honor has to be satisfied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you are not worthy. Yep. There's the image and there's the words. Yep.
Yeah, beautiful Paul Smith artwork. All right, guys, we'll finish up with a little bit of other media.
Actually, before we do,
please, Mert, please.
May I request that our producer in residence bring up the cover to Marvel Team Up number 117.
Oh, well done,
Mert. A glimpse of something, kind of an alternate history approach here.
Well done.
This is an issue. This is Wolverine's first opportunity to headline as a co-star with Spider-Man in this series. He had appeared with Spider-Man as one of the X-Men in Marvel Team Up number 100, which is the first time Frank Miller drew Wolverine, I do believe. Right. But 117 is a team up between Spider-Man and Wolverine, drawn by Herb Trimpe, returning to the character. And so here we see, in this cover by Bob Layton, some pretty trippy use of perspective. Yeah. And there is Wolverine's first ever solo logo.
Well done, sir.
Not quite as good and memorable as the better known and more iconic sharp serif font Wolverine logo, which was introduced in the Claremont Miller miniseries.
Yep, definitely.
Well done, Murd. Well done. I remember this story fondly.
Oh boy,
Spidey and Wolverine versus Professor Power.
Yep, and his army of what the guys that are dressed as knights.
Some were knights, some were like Roman centurions.
Yes, that's right, Roman centurions.
And a much more happy, smiling Wolverine than we're used to in the artwork here. It's not exactly I'd say not exactly on model for Wolvie necessarily, but still.
By the way, I'm sorry, and go ahead. I apologize.
No, just saying, just still fun, just not on model. That's all.
If you could find, because I almost forgot to mention this, what if Wolverine had killed the Hulk?
Ooh. Yes.
Which is also from the early 1980s, I believe. It's an early What If issue.
Yep.
Mert, have you read this story?
It certainly sounds familiar.
What If?
Find the cover.
One, I believe.
It's from the first volume of What If. Yes, it's from the first volume.
I'll find that momentarily here, but yep, here we are. With a, by the way, if you buy this issue, and I'll bring it up, you could win a Columbia 10-speed.
Yes.
Racer. So that's good to know. I wonder if that's still running to this day. If you
there's that logo again.
Yes, indeed. Yep. What if bad logo Wolverine had killed the Hulk?
Looks like 1981. I want to say is the copyright year on that. I'm reading that correctly.
February of that year. Whereas the Marvel Team Up issue we just looked at was May of '82.
Yeah.
So I guess this is where that logo first appeared.
I wanted to mention this because this is a great what if in that Wolverine is the classic surly, antisocial violence-prone character in this story because it's the beginning of his history as an X-Man, and it's a great what if. I won't spoil it if you haven't read it, but I mean, what ifs have to be quick because they're usually one and dones, but it kind of shows the price of his behavior and how he realizes how he has to change. But he's because he's killed the Hulk, he's gone down a certain path that leads in a very what ify destination. But if you're a fan of what if, because the what ifs, they could do whatever they wanted. Some of the what ifs were really dark. And this issue definitely falls in that category. I highly recommend it.
Those Marvel team ups with Wolverine, that 117, that is not on the app.
Huh.
Really?
It goes from 116 to 121.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. There are very few gaps in the Unlimited app at this point, and I'm surprised that they're not there. Maybe they're there. Maybe they're not there because of how not in character they are. But
maybe, or maybe they're. I can't imagine, but maybe they're titled somehow
Shane,
else.
is that original What If that he killed the Hulk? Is that on there?
Let's see.
Volume 1, issue 31.
That should be, because I think they have almost every What If issue at this point. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's there. Let's see.
Really good.
Yep. What if? What if you said 35? Correct.
31.
31. Thank you. What if 31? And yeah, let's see. It's really easy to search this app.
It's there.
Okay, good.
I agree, Ian. This app frustrates the hell out of me for searching and saving and viewing.
It's really bad at that. Yeah.
One other point I want to make about. Sorry, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say the other story in that issue was what if the Fantastic Four had never existed? So go figure.
Yes. One of the things with that story is they because it's a what if I remember correctly, they explore the fact that, well, what if Magneto tried to actually utilize Wolverine's skeleton with his powers? So it's a good read it. Last now, other media, fellas.
Yes,
now we started with this quote. We're going to end with this quote. Murd? Go ahead, sir.
Care for a piece of fruit?
So
definitely Australian.
Oh yeah.
God.
This is, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, some of the worst designs for Cyclops and Wolverine that even the 80s animated series could throw out. Like,
somebody drew those on the back of a napkin, I think.
This is 1982.
Yeah.
Shane, I remember this. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Yep.
The episode is entitled "A Firestar Is Born." I just watched it today because I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen it since I was, let's see, in 1982. I was.
You were 9.
19. Yeah, I was 9.
I was 3.
Yeah. So
I was 10.
Yep. So the premise of the episode is that it's Firestar telling her origin.
Yep.
To Spidey and Iceman. Iceman is voiced by Fred from Scooby-Doo, I think.
Frank Welker.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Absolutely right.
And she reunites with because in this universe she was part of the X-Men.
Yep.
So she reunites. I think I want to say it's Angel, Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops. That might be it.
Beast is there or not?
I don't think Beast is there actually.
They actually did another episode with other X-Men too that Wolverine was not in. But so basically, they introduced the X-Men briefly, and they introduced it. They say, "Oh, Firestar, Wolverine joined after you left." And this is like 82. It's like G.I. Joe animation. It's the same animations. It's the same voices. It's the same music. It's the same laser bolt sounds. Everything. I'd forgotten that was basically the same stuff. But
sure.
I hadn't heard this since I was 9 years old. When Wolverine starts talking, I'm like, what in the name of God is going on here? So they decided to make him Australian. Wolverine did a wonderful impersonation. And inexplicably, even though it's by this point in 82, Wolverine is in the brown costume in the comics. They put him back in the original, there's a shish kebab, in the yellow costume. And he's Australian. This is Wolverine's first other media appearance, as far as I know.
And this was probably my
comics.
first exposure to Wolverine, period.
Mm-hmm. Yep, mine too.
Yeah, I mean, luckily my first exposure to Wolverine was the animated series. I didn't experience that. I mean, in '82 I was -2, so I didn't really find X-Men. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends until long after I had already started watching animation, and then I went back to it and watched.
Ian, have you watched this episode?
I've watched this episode. It's bad.
Well, go ahead, Shane.
I know I've watched it in, say, the last 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
Well, I watched it today, and Murd is correct. When he's fighting Juggernaut, he ends up with his claws stuck in a brick wall, and like it's vintage, like early '80s, like superhero cartoons. But that's I felt we had to mention it because it's in the time period that we're talking about. That was Wolverine's first appearance outside of comics.
Yeah. Now, I do want to throw this in there, even though it's technically outside of our time period.
Yes.
Because of Pride of the X-Men, Pride of the X-Men,
which came out in the '90s, correct?
Well, no, that came out in '89, I believe.
'89. Okay, all right.
It was a pilot for a show that didn't proceed forward.
We'll talk about that next time. Yeah,
we will talk about that next time, and we'll probably mention this again next time. But I just want to bring this up because it's the right costume, and it's a slightly later era of.
The video game.
And that would be the X-Men arcade game. This came out in 1992, and again, it was based on the Pride of the X-Men cartoon. But the Wolverine in it is definitely closer to the Wolverine that you would have found in the 70s and early 80s. The only difference is that they have to give them further powers in order for them to have quote unquote super moves. And at one point, if you press the super button, Wolverine does this like dash motion.
Yep.
Or this energy blast essentially comes out of his claws, and he does like a hyper dash around the screen with his claws.
I love playing this game in college.
Oh yeah. Of course, Colossus with his energy.
Yeah, Matt and I used to play that at Reggie's Arcade here in Stone Harbor Youths. And, I was always Nightcrawler, he was always Wolverine. And Ian, when you were talking earlier about what a great friendship those two characters share, it kind of reminds me of Matt's friendship with me.
Yeah. Magnificent.
Yep. Yeah. Excellent. This was indeed a tonic for the spirit, gentlemen.
I've shot my bolt, gentlemen. That's part one.
Yeah.
Well done. And I think we did a good job of getting into the convoluted insanity known only as Wolverine. So job well done all around, everybody. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was fun.
And we brought it home within 3 hours too.
Yep.
I know,
Thank you, brethren. Thank you.
Yep. Yep. And we will get to, further adventures of Wolverine at a later date, but this will at least wet your whistle to go see Wolverine, a much older Wolverine, a much older Hugh Jackman, play the part one more time in Deadpool and Wolverine in theaters as of tomorrow when you're getting.
Now, they haven't revealed how he's alive, right? We have to wait for the movie to see that?
Well, there's theories because of the trailers, yeah.
Okay.
Because of the trailers, you basically get an idea that, multiversal, timey-wimey.
Yeah. Okay. They're plucking him.
Gotcha.
But we'll get into that. Once you see the movie, you'll 100% understand. I don't want to accidentally give some unintended.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Sunday 10 a.m., man.
There you go. All right, excellent. Well, as I said, next episode out will be the other group of fellas, and we'll get together and talk about it, the movie and whatnot, and also have Donovan's report from San Diego Comic-Con. Looking forward to that. And gentlemen, thank you very much once again.
Let me Pooh, thanks for hosting. It was
thank you, Ian.
Honor and a pleasure.
Yep. Whenever you guys want to come around, by all means, I'm here for you. And
when I come around.
Thank you, Green Day. I just saw Foo Fighters at the City Field last week.
Nice.
Ryan went to that as well.
Nice.
That's right, he did. I'm glad I wasn't there on Wednesday. Otherwise, I would have seen half a show because they had to stop at 9:30 because of the rain. All right, moving on to the credits here. Email address, comictiming@gmail.com, facebook.com/comictiming. Feel free to join us on the Comic Timing fan group as well. It's getting bigger and better every single day. Twitter.com/comictimingpod, Blue Sky, we're Comic Timing, Instagram, Comic Timing Podcasts. We're also on Threads and a bunch of other places as well. And of course, youtube.com/Comic Timing Podcast. Do find us on there and check out the video version of this so you can see all the stuff that I put up on the screen and whatnot. Once again, thanks to Murd, thanks to Chris, thanks to Shane, and thanks to me. And as always, there's always Time for comics. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to go get a piece of fruit.